Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. A Wild Colorado Heart. Chapter 1, A New Beginning. The sewing needle flashed in the late afternoon light as Rachel Mathers made the final stitches on Mrs. Blackwell's evening gown. Through the open window of her tiny apartment, the chaos of New York City in the summer of 1882 filtered in, vendors hawking their wares, carriage wheels clattering on cobblestones, and the constant hum of humanity packed too tightly together. Almost finished, just as I promised, Rachel murmured to herself, biting off the thread with a practiced snap of her teeth. At 24, Rachel's fingers bore the calluses of a lifetime spent with needle and thread. She smoothed the midnight blue silk, admiring how the beadwork caught the light. Mrs. Blackwell would look splendid at the Astors' summer ball, a ball Rachel would only ever hear about from behind the counter of Madame Laurent's dress emporium. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Mathers? Are you decent?" Mrs. Finch's reedy voice came through the door. "Yes, Mrs. Finch, please come in," Rachel called, hastily covering the expensive gown. The landlady's perpetually pinched face appeared in the doorway. "A letter came for you, miss." She extended a slightly crumpled envelope. "Looks to be from out west, judging by the postmark." "Thank you." Rachel accepted the envelope, noting the Colorado postmark with curiosity. After Mrs. Finch departed, Rachel settled onto her narrow bed, the only comfortable seating in the room, and broke the seal on the letter. Inside was a response to an advertisement she'd answered on a whim 3 weeks prior, after spotting it in the back pages of the Ladies' Home Companion. "Miss Mathers. Your letter of May 12 reached me in good order. I appreciate your forthright manner in describing yourself and your circumstances. A woman who speaks plain suits the West better than one full of fanciful notions. As requested, I enclose a daguerreotype of myself taken last year in Denver. I am 32 years of age, standing 6 feet tall with no ailments to speak of save an old saddle injury to my left shoulder that pains me some in winter. My ranch comprises 3,000 acres with 500 head of cattle and is situated 7 miles from the town of Smithfield. The house boasts 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor. I employ 3 hands year-round who bunk in the outbuilding. Should you find my situation agreeable, I can forward funds for your passage west. I propose a meeting in Smithfield, followed by a fortnight of proper acquaintance before any wedding takes place. Should either party find the arrangement unsuitable, I would provide return fare to New York with no hard feelings harbored. Respectfully yours, Amos Lyon. Lyon Ranch, Smithfield, Colorado Territory." Rachel studied the enclosed photograph. Amos Lyon had a serious expression, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, though it was impossible to discern their color in the sepia image, seemed to hold a quiet intensity. He wore no smile, but neither did he look unkind. "Well, Mr. Lyon," she whispered, "you certainly don't mince words." A commotion from the street drew her to the window. Below, a group of workers was exiting Madame Laurent's shop, expressions grim. Rachel's stomach tightened. This couldn't be good news. 20 minutes later, Rachel stood before Madame Laurent herself, a diminutive Frenchwoman whose accent grew more pronounced when delivering unpleasant tidings. "It is with great regret, my dear Rachel," Madame Laurent said, gesturing dramatically, "but the shop, she must close. The new department stores, they are killing my business. My husband's brother in Chicago, he offers us partnership in his restaurant. We leave next week." "I see," Rachel said faintly. "And what of the outstanding orders?" "You will finish the Blackwell gown, naturally. The others, we send regrets and return deposits." Madame patted Rachel's hand. "You are my finest seamstress. I will write a recommendation most glowing." Rachel nodded numbly, her mind already calculating figures. Her meager savings might stretch to cover 2 months' rent and food, but no longer. Positions for seamstresses were scarce, with so many immigrant women willing to work for pittances. That evening, after delivering Mrs. Blackwell's gown, Rachel climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, Amos Lyon's letter burning a hole in her reticule. She paused at the 3rd floor landing to catch her breath and found her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, struggling with her door key. "Allow me, Mrs. Anderson," Rachel offered, steadying the older woman's gnarled hand. "Bless you, child. These old fingers ain't what they used to be." Mrs. Anderson peered at Rachel with rheumy eyes. "You look peaked, dearie. Something troubling you?" Before she could stop herself, Rachel confided everything: the shop closing, her financial predicament, and Mr. Lyon's letter. Mrs. Anderson invited her in for tea, serving it in chipped porcelain cups that had once graced a fine home. "I was a mail-order bride myself, you know," she revealed, surprising Rachel. "Back in '42. My Henry was a shopkeeper in St. Louis. Wanted a wife with education enough to help with the books." "Were you frightened?" Rachel asked. Scared as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, Mrs. Anderson chuckled. "But staying in Boston was worse. No prospects, no family after the fever took them." "Did you love him? When you married, I mean." Mrs. Anderson stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Not at first blush. Respect came first, then fondness. Love grew later, like a garden planted in spring." She fixed Rachel with a surprisingly sharp gaze. "This rancher, he writes like an honest man? He seems forthright. Practical. Practical keeps food on the table when poetry don't." Mrs. Anderson nodded approvingly. Later that night, Rachel sat at her small writing desk, Mr. Lyon's letter before her, and began to compose her reply. Her pen moved decisively across the paper. "Mr. Lyon, I find your terms most agreeable. Recent circumstances have hastened my decision, as Madame Laurent's dress emporium where I have been employed these past 6 years is closing its doors." 3 weeks and 2 exchanged letters later, Rachel stood in her nearly empty apartment. Her possessions, those not sold to increase her traveling funds, fit into 1 trunk and a carpetbag. Mrs. Anderson knocked softly before entering. "I brought you something, child." The old woman pressed a small velvet pouch into Rachel's palm. "Was my mother's. Brought it all the way from Ireland, she did." Inside gleamed a delicate pearl hairpin. "Mrs. Anderson, I couldn't possibly." "Hush now. Got no daughters to pass it to, have I? Better it adorns a bride's hair than sits in my jewelry box." Mrs. Anderson's eyes misted. "Colorado's a fair piece from New York. Might be we won't meet again this side of heaven." Rachel embraced the fragile woman, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender water. "I'll write to you. I promise." Mrs. Anderson patted her cheek. "Sometimes love grows in the most unexpected places, Rachel. You remember that when the West seems too big and wild." The next morning, as the first fingers of dawn stretched across the city, Rachel boarded the westbound train. She claimed a window seat, her carpetbag tucked securely beside her, her trunk stowed in the baggage car. As the train lurched forward, belching steam, she caught a final glimpse of the city that had been her home since girlhood. She fingered the pearl hairpin in her pocket and whispered, "Goodbye, New York." Then, squaring her shoulders, she added more firmly, "Hello, Colorado." The iron horse gathered speed, carrying Rachel Mathers toward her new beginning in the West. Chapter 2, Journey West. Rachel awoke with a crick in her neck, the steady rhythm of the train having lulled her into a fitful sleep against the window. Outside, the bustling cities of the East had given way to vast stretches of farmland that seemed to roll endlessly toward the horizon. She straightened her skirts and patted her hair into place, conscious of her appearance among the other passengers. The gentleman across from her, a portly businessman with a gold watch chain stretched across his waistcoat, had disembarked sometime during the night, replaced by a woman dressed in morning black, though the quality of her garments spoke of considerable wealth. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice cultured and precise. "I trust you slept well. Train accommodations are dreadfully uncomfortable, even in first class." I cannot imagine how one manages in second. Rachel, acutely aware of her own second-class ticket, merely smiled. One manages as one must, ma'am. Indeed. The woman extended a gloved hand. Myrtle Gibson. I'm traveling to Denver to settle my late husband's affairs. His mining investments require a personal touch, much as my solicitor protested a widow traveling alone. Rachel Mathers. I'm bound for Colorado as well. She hesitated, then added, Smithfield. Smithfield? Myrtle's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. That's rather remote, isn't it? Do you have family there? Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. Not precisely. I'm to be married. Ah. Understanding dawned in Myrtle's eyes. A mail-order arrangement, then. Rachel lifted her chin. Yes. To a cattle rancher named Amos Lyon. My dear girl, said Myrtle, leaning forward and lowering her voice, do you have any notion what you're getting yourself into? The frontier is no place for a genteel young woman. The weather alone is punishing, blistering summers and winters that freeze your very breath. Not to mention Indians, outlaws, and the crude society. I'm hardly genteel, Mrs. Gibson. I was a seamstress in New York. Even so. Men out west, they're a different breed. Rough. Uncultured. Myrtle's gaze swept over Rachel's simple blue traveling dress, lingering on the mended cuff. A woman needs resources to maintain standards of civilization in such places. Do you sew your own clothes? Yes, ma'am. Well, that's something, I suppose. Myrtle sat back, her assessment complete. Though I wonder if your Mr. Lyon appreciates the difference between cotton and silk. Rachel bit her tongue against a sharp retort. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead, but this woman's condescension rankled. Before she could respond, the train whistle blew, signaling their approach to Chicago's Grand Central Depot. We change trains here, Myrtle said, gathering her reticule. The dining room serves a tolerable luncheon, if you're inclined. The Chicago station bustled with activity, travelers hurrying in all directions, porters hauling trunks, hawkers selling newspapers and candy. Rachel stepped carefully around a group of immigrant families huddled near their meager possessions. The air hung heavy with coal smoke, human bodies, and the peculiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that permeated all train stations. Miss. Please, miss. A high, desperate voice cut through the din. Rachel turned to see a harried-looking woman in a faded dress, clutching the hand of a small boy no more than 8 years old. The woman's eyes darted nervously about the station. Would you watch my boy? Just for a moment. I need to purchase our tickets. The woman thrust the child toward Rachel without waiting for a response. Caleb, mind the lady. I'll return directly. Before Rachel could object, the woman disappeared into the crowd. Caleb looked up at her with solemn brown eyes, his small face pinched with worry beneath a mop of sandy hair. Hello, Caleb, Rachel said gently. Is that your mama? The boy nodded, his eyes tracking the spot where the woman had vanished. She said we're going to California to meet Papa. He struck gold. How wonderful, Rachel replied, though something in the boy's demeanor made her uneasy. I'm sure she'll be back soon. Are you hungry? Caleb shook his head, then reconsidered. A little, maybe. Rachel purchased a sandwich and an apple from a nearby vendor. The boy ate ravenously, as though he hadn't seen food in days. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The westbound train would depart soon, and still, there was no sign of Caleb's mother. Perhaps we should speak with the station master, Rachel suggested, growing increasingly concerned. She ain't coming back, is she? Caleb's voice was small but oddly resigned. Rachel knelt before him, choosing her words carefully. Why would you think that, Caleb? She said the same thing in Philadelphia. And in Pittsburgh. A single tear tracked down his dirt-smudged cheek. Said she was getting tickets, but she was really leaving me behind. The police found me both times and made her take me back. Horror washed over Rachel as she realized what was happening. "Oh, Caleb." A commotion near the ticket counter drew their attention. Two policemen were questioning passengers, and Rachel caught snippets about an abandoned child. With a sinking heart, she approached them, Caleb's small hand clutched in hers. "Officers," she began, "I believe this is the boy you're looking for." The older policeman sighed, removing his hat. "Third time in as many months. Poor little feller. What will happen to him?" Rachel asked. "Orphanage, most like. Unless his pa really is in California, but I doubt that tale something fierce." The younger officer crouched down. "What's your full name, son?" "Caleb Reed," the boy whispered. "My papa died in the war. Mama said it was a glorious sacrifice, but she always looks mad when she says it." As the officers prepared to take Caleb away, the boy suddenly threw his arms around Rachel's waist. "Please don't let them take me, miss. Please. I'll be good." Rachel's heart constricted painfully. "I wish I could help, Caleb, truly I do. Miss Mathers." Myrtle Gibson's imperious voice cut through the moment. "Our train departs in 10 minutes. Whatever is the matter?" Quickly, Rachel explained the situation. To her surprise, Myrtle's expression softened as she regarded the trembling boy. "A motherless child," she murmured. "How perfectly dreadful." Then, more briskly to the officers, "Gentlemen, surely there's a more humane solution than an orphanage. Perhaps a telegram to the authorities in Denver? I have connections there who might help place the boy with a suitable family." Whether it was Myrtle's commanding presence or the flash of her diamond rings, the officers agreed to her suggestion. As they led Caleb away, the boy looked back at Rachel with wide, frightened eyes that would haunt her for days to come. The remainder of the journey to Denver passed in subdued conversation. Myrtle proved more companionable than Rachel had initially judged, sharing anecdotes of her late husband's adventures in the Colorado Territory and offering practical advice about frontier living. When they parted at Denver station, Myrtle pressed a calling card into Rachel's hand. "Should you ever find yourself in need, my dear, Denver isn't so very far from Smithfield." The stagecoach to Smithfield was a jarring contrast to the train's relative comfort. Rachel shared the cramped space with a traveling salesman, an elderly couple heading to their daughter's homestead, and a young woman with sharp features and expensive, if slightly outdated, attire. Josephine Miller, the young woman, introduced herself with a curious glance at Rachel's luggage. "You're new to these parts." Rachel Mathers, "Yes. I'm coming from New York." Josephine's eyebrows rose. "New York? What business brings a New York lady to our humble Smithfield?" "I'm to be married," Rachel replied, growing weary of explaining herself. "Married? To whom?" Josephine's tone sharpened. "Amos Lyon. Of Lyon Ranch." Josephine's face underwent a remarkable transformation: surprise, recognition, and then something that looked unsettlingly like contempt. "Amos Lyon," she repeated slowly. "Well, isn't that interesting? I had expectations regarding Mr. Lyon myself, once upon a time." The stagecoach hit a particularly deep rut, sending the passengers lurching against one another. As Rachel righted herself, she caught Josephine studying her with calculated assessment. "Tell me, Miss Mathers," Josephine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "has Mr. Lyon mentioned anything about his first wife?" Chapter 3, Arrival in Smithfield. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. First wife? The words came out as barely a whisper. Before Josephine could elaborate, the stagecoach driver called out, "Smithfield, just ahead." Rachel pressed her face to the window, grateful for the interruption. The town materialized in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a wide, dirt main street, backed by mountains that scraped the sky. As they drew closer, she realized the normally sleepy frontier town was alive with activity. Brightly colored banners hung between buildings, and townspeople milled about in their Sunday best despite it being a Thursday. "The summer festival," Josephine explained with obvious pride. "Daddy, that's Mayor Miller to everyone else, started it 5 years back. Brings folks from 3 counties to trade and socialize. You've arrived on a fortunate day, Miss Mathers. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before the Smithfield Hotel, a 2-story clapboard building with a wide porch. Rachel stepped down, legs wobbling from the long journey. The cacophony of the festival enveloped her, a fiddler playing near the saloon, children shrieking with laughter as they chased a pig down an alley, the mingled aromas of barbecue, fresh bread, and horses. My word, Rachel murmured, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Her gaze darted through the crowd, wondering which of these strangers might be Amos Lyon. Miss Mathers? A deep voice spoke from behind her. Rachel turned to find herself facing a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His sandy hair was neatly trimmed, though a few unruly strands fell across his forehead. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, a startling blue, like the summer sky after a storm. This was the man from the daguerreotype, though the photograph had failed to capture his commanding presence. Mr. Lyon, she managed, offering her hand. His calloused palm enveloped hers, the touch brief but oddly reassuring. Welcome to Smithfield. How was your journey? Long but uneventful, Rachel replied, deciding the incident with Caleb was too complicated to relate in this first meeting. She felt Josephine's eyes boring into her back and added, I had pleasant company. Amos's gaze shifted to Josephine, and Rachel didn't miss the slight tightening of his jaw. Miss Miller. Your father well? Fit as a fiddle, Mr. Lyon. Josephine's smile was sweet as honey, but her eyes remained cold. I was just becoming acquainted with your intended. Amos nodded stiffly. If you'll excuse us, I've arranged for Miss Mathers to take refreshment before the journey to the ranch. Josephine's lips thinned. Of course. Miss Mathers, we simply must continue our conversation soon. I have so many insights about life here that a new bride would find invaluable. As Josephine swept away, Amos directed a porter to collect Rachel's trunk. Sheriff Caldwell's wife has prepared a room at their boarding house for you. I hope that meets with your approval. Perfectly, Rachel assured him, though the mention of his first wife burned in her mind like a hot coal. Mr. Lyon, Please, he interjected, call me Amos. His expression softened slightly. We've been corresponding for months. Seems foolish to stand on formality now. They walked side by side down the bustling street. Rachel felt painfully conspicuous in her travel-worn dress, aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Amos nodded politely to several people but made no introductions. You ain't much for palavering, are you? Rachel observed, deliberately using the colloquialism she'd heard on the stagecoach. Amos's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Not generally, no. Does that trouble you? Not particularly. I merely wondered if you intended to introduce me to anyone, or if I'm to be your secret bride. This time, he did smile, a brief flash that transformed his serious countenance. No secrets in Smithfield. Everybody's business gets passed around quicker than a jug of moonshine at a barn raising. He guided her toward a modest building with a sign reading, Ruby's Eatery. Thought we might take our meal here before meeting the sheriff and his wife. Best chicken and dumplings west of the Mississippi. Ruby's Eatery was mercifully cool after the summer heat outside. Amos led Rachel to a corner table, pulling out her chair with unexpected gallantry. A buxom woman with flaming red hair approached, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. Well, butter my backside and call me a biscuit. If it ain't Amos Lyon in town 2 days running. The woman's boisterous greeting drew several glances. And who's this pretty little filly? Ruby, this is Miss Rachel Mathers from New York, my intended. Amos's ears reddened slightly at the declaration. Ruby's eyes widened. Land sakes alive. The mail-order bride came. Half the town was wagering you'd be stood up, Amos Lyon. She turned to Rachel with a genuine smile. No offense meant, dearie. It's just that city gals don't often cotton to our rustic ways. None taken, Rachel assured her, warming to the woman's straightforward manner. Ruby owns the finest restaurant in 3 counties, Amos explained. And possesses the loosest tongue as well. Pshaw. Someone's gotta keep the conversation flowing in this town. Ruby winked. Now, what'll you have? The special's chicken and dumplings, but I just pulled a berry cobbler from the oven that'd make an angel weep. After they ordered, an awkward silence fell between Rachel and Amos. She studied him surreptitiously, noting the tiny lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the careful way he arranged his napkin, the slight callus on his right middle finger where a pen would rest. You're staring, Amos observed quietly. Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. Forgive me. It's just, your letters gave me some sense of you, but meeting in person is different. A disappointment? His expression remained neutral, but Rachel detected a hint of vulnerability in his question. Not at all, she answered honestly. Though you are more imposing than I imagined. Before Amos could respond, the restaurant door swung open to admit a tall man wearing a sheriff's badge and a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked brown hair. Speak of the devil, Amos murmured, rising to his feet. Sheriff Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell, may I present Miss Rachel Mathers? Sheriff Caldwell tipped his hat. Mighty pleased to meet you, Miss Mathers. Heard you were arriving today. Mrs. Caldwell clasped Rachel's hand warmly. Welcome to Smithfield, dear. I've prepared the blue room for you, it catches the morning light something wonderful. Martha runs the boarding house, Amos explained. As we discussed in our letters, you'll stay there until the wedding. My ranch is no place for a proper lady until we're married. Amos Lyon, you sound positively antediluvian, Martha scolded good-naturedly. But he's right about that ranch. Bachelor quarters if I ever saw them. Needs a woman's touch, something fierce. Now Martha, Sheriff Caldwell warned, don't go filling the lady's head with notions. Amos keeps a fine spread. Amos cleared his throat. Perhaps we could discuss the wedding arrangements. The Reverend Mills could perform the ceremony 2 Sundays from now, if that suits. That's just dandy, Martha enthused. Gives us time for proper preparations and lets you two get acquainted. She lowered her voice. No disrespect to the male, but letters can only tell you so much about a person. As they discussed details, Rachel found herself studying Amos when he wasn't looking. There was a steadiness to him that she found appealing, nothing flashy or false, just quiet competence. When he spoke of his ranch, his reserve melted away, revealing genuine passion. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be so difficult after all, Rachel thought. Then she remembered Josephine's parting words and the mysterious first wife. That was a conversation for another day, she decided. For now, she would focus on becoming acquainted with Amos Lyon and the frontier town that was to be her new home. Well, I'll be hornswoggled, Ruby declared, returning with heaping plates. If you two ain't the most handsome couple this side of Denver. She set down the food with a flourish. Here's to new beginnings, Miss Mathers. May your marriage be as satisfying as my chicken and dumplings, hearty, warm, and with just enough pepper to keep things interesting. Chapter 4, Town Life. Rachel awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't recall where she was. The bed was softer than her New York apartment, the air fresher, and the sounds entirely different. Then yesterday's events came rushing back, the arrival in Smithfield, meeting Amos Lyon, and the arrangements at the boarding house. She rose and crossed to the window. From her second-floor room, she could see most of Main Street and, beyond it, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains. The town was already bustling despite the early hour, merchants opening shops, women carrying baskets to the general store, cowboys ambling toward the livery stable with that distinctive bow-legged gait. A soft knock interrupted her observations. Miss Mathers? Breakfast is served, Martha Caldwell called through the door. Rachel quickly dressed in a simple blue calico and pinned her hair in a practical knot. She'd need to become accustomed to dressing without assistance. There would be no ladies' maids on a cattle ranch. The boarding house dining room smelled of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. 2 men in business attire, traveling salesmen, Rachel guessed, were already seated at one end of the long table. Martha bustled about with a coffee pot. "There you are, dear. Did you sleep well? I've made johnny cakes and bacon. The sheriff's already gone, gets an early start when the town's full for the festival." "Everything looks wonderful," Rachel said, taking the offered seat. "Thank you for your hospitality." Martha waved away the thanks. "Nonsense. It's not every day we welcome a new bride to Smithfield. Amos mentioned you were a seamstress back east. Mighty fortunate for us, been needing someone with proper skills since old Mrs. Hadaway's eyesight went. Poor woman can hardly thread a needle now." Rachel's interest piqued. "Is there much demand for seamstress work in town?" "Lord, yes. Especially with families coming in from outlying homesteads. Women here make do with what they have, but for special occasions, weddings, christenings, Christmas socials, they want something fine." Martha leaned closer. "Between us, some of these ranch wives have money to spare but nowhere decent to spend it. You could do well for yourself, even after you're settled at Lyon Ranch." The thought of maintaining her own income, however modest, eased a worry Rachel hadn't fully acknowledged. Though Amos seemed honorable, she'd be entirely dependent on him otherwise. "I'd like that very much," she replied. After breakfast, Martha suggested a proper tour of Smithfield. "Church socials tonight. Everyone will want to meet Amos Lyon's intended." They set out along the wooden sidewalk, Martha greeting everyone they passed. Rachel was introduced to so many people that their names became a blur: storekeeper Peterson, blacksmith Reynolds and his wife, the Cooper twins who ran the millinery shop, and Dr. Wilson and his young assistant. Smithfield was larger than Rachel had initially judged, with several side streets branching from the main thoroughfare. "And this," Martha said proudly, "is our schoolhouse. Built just 3 years ago with donations from every family in the county." The schoolhouse was a tidy white building with a small bell tower. Through the open windows, Rachel could hear children reciting multiplication tables. A young woman with spectacles and a severe bun directed the lesson. "Miss Abigail Forrester," Martha explained. "Came from Boston last year. Dedicated teacher, if a bit rigid in her methods." As they watched, the schoolhouse door opened and a familiar small figure darted out, heading for the outhouse behind the building. "Caleb?" Rachel gasped. The boy froze at the sound of his name, then turned slowly. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "The lady from the train station." Rachel hurried toward him, scarcely believing her eyes. "Caleb Reed, what on earth are you doing in Smithfield? You know him?" Martha asked, surprised. "We met in Chicago," Rachel explained briefly, then addressed Caleb again. "How did you come to be here?" Caleb scuffed his worn boot in the dirt. "Mr. Gunderson took me in. Says I can help in his store." "Jonas Gunderson?" Martha frowned. "The old shopkeeper? Land sake, he can barely look after himself these days." Rachel knelt to Caleb's level. "Are you well treated? Do you have enough to eat?" "I gets by," Caleb shrugged. "Mr. Gunderson ain't mean, just forgetful sometimes. I remind him to eat his dinner, and he lets me sleep in the back room." Martha's frown deepened. "I'll have a word with Sheriff Caldwell about this. Jonas is nearly 70, no business taking in a child. I don't want to go to no orphanage." Panic flashed in Caleb's eyes. "Please, miss. Mr. Gunderson needs me." Before Rachel could respond, the schoolteacher appeared at the doorway. "Young man. Return to class immediately." Caleb cast one last pleading look at Rachel before racing back inside. Martha sighed heavily. Poor little mite. Jonas probably thought he was doing right, but that old man drinks more than he should. As they continued their tour, Rachel's thoughts remained with Caleb. By mid-afternoon, she'd met most of Smithfield's prominent citizens and formed a general impression of the town: hard-working, close-knit, but not without its divisions. The mining families kept somewhat separate from the ranchers, and both regarded the merchants with a mixture of dependence and suspicion. Martha insisted Rachel rest before the evening's church social. First impressions matter, especially with Amos being such a catch. Half the unmarried women in 3 counties had their cap set for him at one time or another. Alone in her room, Rachel removed Amos's letters from her carpetbag, rereading them for clues about the man she'd agreed to marry. His handwriting was neat but distinctly masculine, his sentences direct without being brusque. He'd written of the ranch, the cattle market, the new barn he'd built last fall, practical matters primarily. Only occasionally did he reveal anything personal, like his fondness for watching thunderstorms roll across the plains or his habit of reading history books during the long winter evenings. Nowhere did he mention a previous marriage. The evening's church social was held in the basement of the white clapboard building that served as Smithfield's place of worship. Trestle tables lined the walls, laden with every variety of pie, cake, and casserole. Kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk, dressed in their finest attire. Amos appeared at Rachel's side as she entered with Martha. He wore a clean white shirt with a string tie, his usually unruly hair slicked down with pomade. "Miss Mathers," he greeted her, the formality at odds with the warmth in his eyes. "You look lovely this evening." Rachel felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Lyon, Amos," she corrected herself. "Allow me to introduce you properly," he said, offering his arm. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions. Rachel was scrutinized by curious eyes, her accent remarked upon, her dress admired, and her journey questioned. She did her best to appear poised and agreeable, though her cheeks ached from smiling. "You're doing splendidly," Amos murmured as they moved between groups. "Everyone's impressed." "Even Josephine?" Rachel nodded subtly toward where Miss Miller stood with several young women, all watching them with undisguised interest. Amos's jaw tightened. "Pay her no mind. Josephine Miller enjoys stirring up trouble." As if on cue, Josephine approached, her green silk dress rustling impressively. "Miss Mathers. We didn't finish our conversation yesterday." "Another time perhaps," Amos interjected. "Rachel hasn't tried Mrs. Caldwell's famous apple pie yet." "Oh, but this can't wait," Josephine smiled sweetly. "I was just telling the girls about your situation, Amos. It takes a special kind of woman to take on a man with your history." She turned to Rachel. "Did he tell you about Sarah? Or about what happened to his first?" "Josephine." Amos's voice held a quiet warning. "Not here." Rachel felt the weight of curious stares. Clearly, there was more to Amos's past than he'd revealed in his letters. Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Caleb Reed stood in the doorway, his face streaked with tears and dirt, a livid bruise darkening his left cheek. Chapter 5, Getting to Know Amos. A hush fell over the church social as Caleb stood trembling in the doorway. Rachel moved without thinking, crossing the room in swift strides. "Caleb, what happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. The boy's lower lip quivered. "Mr. Gunderson got into his whiskey. Said I broke a jar of pickles, but I didn't. It fell when he was reachin' for more drink." Sheriff Caldwell appeared at Rachel's side, his expression grave. "Where's Jonas now, son?" "Passed out at the counter," Caleb whispered. "I waited till he was sleepin' before I ran here. Miss Rachel said she was at the Borden house, but Mrs. Finch said she was here instead." Amos stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring. "Let's get that cheek looked at, boy." He nodded toward Dr. Wilson, who was already approaching with his medical bag. As the doctor examined Caleb, the social resumed with subdued conversation, though many glances were cast toward the small tableau. Martha brought a plate of food for the boy, clucking sympathetically. "This ain't right," Sheriff Caldwell muttered. "Jonas needs help himself, not responsibility for a child." Amos cleared his throat. "The boy could stay at my ranch until proper arrangements are made. Plenty of room, and Miguel's wife could keep an eye on him during the day." Rachel looked up in surprise. This generous offer seemed at odds with the reserved man she was coming to know. Amos met her gaze steadily, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding passing between them. That's mighty decent, Lyon, the sheriff approved. I'll have a word with Jonas tomorrow, see if he's agreeable. After the excitement subsided, Amos approached Rachel with 2 cups of punch. I promise to show you the ranch tomorrow, he said quietly. That's still agreeable to you? Very much so, she replied. And thank you, for offering to help Caleb. Amos's expression softened. Boy needs looking after, that's all. He hesitated, then added, figured you might have taken a shine to him, from the way you rushed over. The remainder of the social passed pleasantly enough, though Rachel noticed Josephine Miller watching her with undisguised calculation. As they prepared to leave, Amos mentioned he would collect Rachel at 9 the following morning. We're something suitable for riding, he advised. The best view of the property is from the North Ridge. Rachel's sleep that night was fitful, her dreams a jumble of train stations, abandoned children, and searching for something important in an endlessly expanding house. She woke earlier than necessary, spending extra time selecting her attire, a practical divided riding skirt she'd sewn herself and a crisp white shirtwaist. Amos arrived promptly at 9, driving a well-maintained buckboard with 2 handsome bay horses. Rachel was struck again by his imposing presence, broad-shouldered and straight-backed in a clean flannel shirt and denims, his hat tipped at a practical angle against the morning sun. You look. He began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. That riding skirt is sensible. High praise indeed, Rachel replied with a touch of amusement. I designed it myself. As they left town, the landscape opened before them, rolling grassland stretching toward distant mountains, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. Amos pointed out landmarks as they traveled, Lightning Ridge where strikes were common during summer storms, Cooper's Creek that never ran dry even in drought years, the distant windbreak where his property began. How large is your ranch exactly? Rachel asked, mentally comparing the vast expanse to the cramped streets of New York. 3,000 acres, give or take. Amos handled the reins with easy confidence. Started with just 500 when I came west after the war. Added parcels as I could afford them. You built all this yourself? Rachel couldn't keep the admiration from her voice. Amos shrugged modestly. Had nothing but determination when I arrived. Worked other men's cattle for 3 years, sleeping in lined shacks and saving every penny. When old man Davidson wanted to sell his claim and head to California, I had just enough saved for a down payment. They crested a gentle rise, and suddenly the ranch spread before them, a neat 2-story house painted white with green trim, several outbuildings including a large barn, and a sprawling corral where horses grazed. Beyond lay vast pastureland where cattle dotted the landscape like dark punctuation marks on a green page. It's beautiful, Rachel breathed. It ain't fancy, Amos said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone, but it's solid. Built the house myself, with help from my hands. I wasn't being polite, Amos. It truly is beautiful. Something in her sincerity seemed to touch him. His posture relaxed slightly as he guided the buckboard down the slope toward the house. Thought we might picnic by the stream, he suggested. Show you the whole spread. The stream in question cut across the eastern portion of the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows that provided welcome shade. Amos spread a blanket on a grassy bank and unpacked a basket Martha had prepared, fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a jug of lemonade. This reminds me of my childhood in upstate New York, Rachel confessed as they ate. Before my parents moved to the city, we lived near a creek not unlike this one. You haven't spoken much of your family, Amos observed. Rachel folded her napkin carefully. There isn't much to tell. They died in a fire when I was 16. I apprenticed to a seamstress afterward. My mother had already taught me the basics. I'm sorry, Amos said simply. The lack of platitudes was oddly comforting. What of your family? She asked. You mentioned coming west after the war, but nothing before that. Amos leaned back against a tree trunk, his expression thoughtful. Born in Tennessee. Father had a modest farm, nothing like this spread. 5 children, I was the middle one. When the war came, my older brothers joined up with the Confederacy. He paused. I went north instead. That must have been difficult, Rachel said carefully. Pa said I wasn't welcome home afterward. Amos's voice was matter-of-fact, but Rachel sensed the old pain beneath the words. Ma wrote letters in secret for a few years, then they stopped coming. Heard later she'd taken sick and passed. So, you came west to start anew? Amos nodded. Nothing for me back east. Figured I'd find my own place, build something that was mine alone. He gazed across his land with quiet pride. Started with just 10 head of cattle and a broken-down cabin. Now I run 500 head, employ 3 good men year-round, and the house doesn't leak when it rains. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a rider, a young man in dusty clothes who pulled his horse up short when he spotted them. Mr. Lyon. Didn't mean to intrude on your picnic. What is it, Sam? Amos's tone was patient but alert. That heifer in the south pasture, the one that was struggling yesterday? Miguel says she's dropped her calf but something ain't right. Amos was on his feet immediately. Excuse me, Rachel. This won't wait. Of course. May I come along? When Amos hesitated, she added, I grew up around farm animals. I won't faint at the sight of a difficult birthing. Amos studied her for a moment, then nodded. They quickly packed the picnic and followed Sam to where a red and white heifer lay in obvious distress beneath a cottonwood. 2 men, one elderly with graying whiskers, one younger with distinctly Mexican features, knelt beside her. Calves turned wrong, boss, the older man reported. Been trying to reposition it, but she's fighting us something fierce. Amos knelt beside the animal, speaking softly as he examined her. Easy, girl. We're trying to help your little one. To Rachel's surprise, he began to sing softly, an old ballad about green valleys, his deep voice soothing the distressed animal. With gentle but firm hands, Amos worked alongside his men, eventually delivering a healthy calf. Rachel watched in admiration as he cleaned the newborn, his deft movements belying his size and strength. This tender care for a creature in need revealed a side of Amos Lyon she hadn't glimpsed before. As they rode back toward the house, Amos studied her from beneath the brim of his hat. You didn't turn squeamish, he observed. I told you I wouldn't. Most city women would have been reaching for their smelling salts. I'm not most women, Rachel replied simply. For the first time, Amos Lyon smiled fully, a genuine expression that transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a chipped front tooth that somehow made him more handsome, not less. No, he agreed, you certainly ain't. Chapter 6, Growing Tensions. The following days settled into a comfortable rhythm for Rachel. Mornings were spent assisting Martha with boarding house duties or visiting the local shops to acquaint herself with Smithfield's offerings. Afternoons often found her sewing. She'd already received 3 commissions after word spread of her skill with a needle. Evenings typically brought Amos's company, sometimes for dinner at the boarding house, other times for walks along the town's quieter streets as the summer sun lingered in the western sky. Rachel found herself looking forward to these encounters, drawn to Amos's straightforward manner and quiet strength. Today, however, she was alone as she entered Gunderson's general store, a list of sewing notions in hand. The store's interior was dim after the bright sunlight outside, shelves crowded with merchandise ranging from farm implements to bolt fabric. The store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and the faint mustiness of dust gathering in corners. Be with you in a minute, called a reedy voice from the back room. Jonas Gunderson emerged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. His rheumy eyes brightened with recognition. Ah, Miss Mathers, Amos Lyons intended. What can I do for you today? Good morning, Mr. Gunderson. I need some thread and buttons for Mrs. Reynolds' daughter's dress. Rachel glanced around. Is Caleb here? I haven't seen him since the social. Gunderson's expression soured. Boys upstairs, supposedly organizing inventory. Sheriff made quite a fuss over a little discipline. In my day, children respected their elders. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Between us, I think Lyon only took the boy in to impress you. Man's been alone too long, if you ask me. Rachel bristled at the insinuation but maintained her composure. I find Mr. Lyon to be a man of genuine character. Now, about that thread. The shop door swung open, admitting Josephine Miller in a fashionable burgundy walking dress. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Rachel. Well, if it isn't the Eastern bride. Shopping for your trousseau? Just sewing supplies, Miss Miller. I'm working on several commissions. How industrious. Josephine's tone suggested this was not a compliment. I suppose Amos's circumstances require a practical wife rather than an ornamental one. Before Rachel could respond, Josephine turned to the shopkeeper. Mr. Gunderson, Daddy needs his special coffee order. The kind from Brazil? Her emphasis on special, and the shopkeeper's knowing nod suggested the request might involve something stronger than coffee beans. Of course, Miss Miller. Just arrived yesterday. I'll fetch it from the storeroom. Gunderson disappeared into the back of the shop. Josephine inspected a display of gloves with affected casualness. You've been in town nearly a week now. I imagine you've heard all sorts of stories about Amos and me. People have been remarkably discreet, Rachel replied coolly. How disappointing for you. Josephine selected a pair of gloves, examining the stitching. I suppose Amos hasn't told you much about Sarah either? Rachel maintained her composure with effort. Mr. Lyon's past is his business. I'm concerned with our future. How noble. Josephine replaced the gloves and moved closer, lowering her voice. But shouldn't a bride know what she's walking into? Amos and I were practically promised to each other before his cattle drive to Kansas 3 years ago. When he returned. Her voice trailed off meaningfully. I fail to see how this concerns me. Rachel selected spools of thread with deliberate care. It concerns you because Amos Lyon isn't the man you think he is. Ask him about the winter of '79. Ask him why. Josephine broke off as Gunderson returned with a brown paper package. While Josephine completed her transaction, Rachel moved to the far corner of the store, ostensibly examining fabric. A small noise from behind a half-open door caught her attention. Peering through the crack, she spotted Caleb huddled on the stairs leading to the upper floor. The boy pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes pleading. Rachel gave him a slight nod and turned away, continuing her shopping. After Josephine departed with a final smirking glance, Rachel approached the counter to pay for her items. Mr. Gunderson, might I speak with Caleb briefly? I promised Mrs. Caldwell I'd measure him for a new shirt. Gunderson waved dismissively toward the stairs. Help yourself. Boy needs proper clothes if he's staying at Lyon's Ranch. Reflects poorly on the town having him look like a ragamuffin. Rachel found Caleb sitting on the top step, a bruise yellowing on his cheek. Hello there, she said gently. Are you well? Caleb shrugged. Mr. Amos said I could stay at his ranch, but I gotta come help Mr. Gunderson during the days. It ain't so bad when he ain't been drinkin'. Rachel's heart ached at his matter-of-fact tone. Does Mr. Gunderson drink often? Mostly evenings. Mornings are okay. Caleb picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. Mr. Amos gave me a real bed all to myself. And his cook, Senora Vasquez, makes tortillas fresh every morning. I'm glad you're comfortable there. Rachel hesitated, then asked, Caleb, did you happen to overhear what Miss Miller was saying to me? The boy nodded solemnly. She don't like you much. Always talking mean about Mr. Amos too, when she comes in for her pa's whiskey. Her father's whiskey? That's what's in them special packages. Mr. Gunderson keeps it hid, 'cause Mayor Miller pretends he don't drink on account of being a church elder. Rachel filed this information away, thanked Caleb, and promised to visit him at the ranch soon. As she exited the store, the door swung open violently, splashing coffee down the front of her dress. Josephine Miller stood in the doorway, feigning shock. Oh my! How clumsy of me! Josephine's eyes glittered with satisfaction as she surveyed the brown stain spreading across Rachel's best blue dress. Coffee does leave such dreadful marks. I don't suppose New York trained you to remove such stains? In fact, it did, Rachel replied evenly, though inwardly she fumed. The dress was one of only 3 she'd brought from New York, and the damage would be difficult to remedy. Excuse me, Miss Miller. I'd best attend to this immediately. As Rachel hurried toward the boarding house, she caught sight of Caleb darting through the alley behind the general store. Changing direction, she followed, concerned by his furtive manner. She found him crouched behind a rain barrel, pressing a handkerchief to his cheek. Caleb. What happened? The boy startled, then relaxed seeing it was her. Weren't nothin'. Mr. Gunderson got mad after you left. Said I was eavesdroppin' and oughtn't be talkin' to you about family business. Rachel gently moved his hand to reveal a fresh bruise blooming beneath the fading one. This is unacceptable, she said firmly. Come, we're going to see Sheriff Caldwell. No. Panic flashed in Caleb's eyes. They'll send me away. Please, miss, I can handle Mr. Gunderson. It's better than the orphanage. Before Rachel could respond, a bell began tolling, the church bell, she realized, though it wasn't Sunday. What's that for? Church meetin', Caleb explained. Mr. Gunderson told me it happens every other Sunday. All the important folks go. Then that's where we'll find Amos, Rachel decided. Come along. They reached the church as the congregation was filing inside. Amos stood near the entrance, deep in conversation with Sheriff Caldwell. His expression brightened at the sight of Rachel, then darkened as he noticed Caleb's injury and the stain on Rachel's dress. What happened? He asked, his voice low and controlled. Rachel explained about the incident with Josephine and Caleb's new bruise. Amos's jaw tightened dangerously, but before he could respond, Mayor Miller approached with his daughter at his side. Lyon. Just the man I wanted to see. Miller was a florid man with a prosperous belly and thinning hair. Been meaning to discuss that section of Willow Creek that runs through your property. My surveyor found some interesting discrepancies in the original land grant. Amos stiffened, carefully avoiding looking at Josephine. Any concerns about property lines should go through proper legal channels, Miller. Of course, of course. Just being neighborly. Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll chat after services. Josephine tells me your intended is settling in nicely. Charming addition to our little community. As the Millers entered the church, Sheriff Caldwell shook his head. That man's been trying to get his hands on Willow Creek Valley for years. Best water rights in the county. Rachel noticed Amos deliberately avoid the Millers during the service, sitting on the opposite side of the church. Later, as they walked back to the boarding house, she gathered her courage. Amos, may I ask you something? He glanced down at her, expression guarded. Of course. Who is Sarah? Chapter 7, The Wedding Day. Amos halted mid-stride, his expression shuddering like a window against an approaching storm. Where did you hear that name? His voice was carefully neutral, but Rachel detected the tension beneath. Josephine mentioned her. And others have hinted at something in your past. Rachel met his gaze steadily. I don't require your entire history, Amos, but if we're to be married in a week's time, I deserve to know if there are matters that might affect our future. For a long moment, Amos said nothing, staring at a point beyond her shoulder. Finally, he sighed. Not here. Come by the ranch tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk then. Without waiting for her response, he tipped his hat and strode away, leaving Rachel with more questions than answers. The week that followed passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Martha orchestrated everything with military precision, alterations to Rachel's dress. She'd managed to salvage the coffee-stained blue gown for the ceremony, arrangements with Reverend Mills, and planning the modest reception to be held at the Caldwell home afterward. Through it all, Rachel's conversation with Amos remained at the forefront of her mind. He had been quietly forthcoming when she'd visited the ranch, explaining in his straightforward way that Sarah had been his wife briefly, years ago. Married her in Denver when I was 20, he'd told her, hands clasped before him as they sat on the porch. She was a shopkeeper's daughter with grand ideas about ranch life. Reality didn't match her expectations. After 3 months, I rode out to check the north pasture and came home to find her gone. Took the wagon, left a note saying she was returning to civilization. Divorce papers arrived from Boston 6 months later. The story rang true, matching what Rachel had observed of Amos's character. Still, she sensed he wasn't sharing everything. And the winter of '79 that Josephine mentioned? A shadow had crossed Amos's face. Nothing to do with Sarah. That was something else. Something I don't speak on. His eyes had held such raw pain that Rachel hadn't pressed further. Now, on her wedding morning, Rachel stood before the small mirror in her boarding house room, studying her reflection. Dark clouds gathered outside, promising rain before midday. Martha had helped arrange her hair in an elegant knot, securing it with Mrs. Anderson's pearl hairpin. "You make a beautiful bride," Martha declared, adjusting the collar of Rachel's blue silk gown. "Amos Lyon won't know what hit him." Rachel smiled, though butterflies danced in her stomach. "Do you think it will rain on us?" "Consider it good fortune," Martha replied practically. "Rain on your wedding day means fertility and cleansing of past sorrows. Besides, we need the moisture something fierce. Fields are drier than week-old cornbread." A knock at the door announced Sheriff Caldwell, dressed in his Sunday best. He'd offered to escort Rachel to the church in Amos's absence. Tradition dictated the groom shouldn't see his bride before the ceremony. "My, don't you look fetching," the sheriff said kindly. "Ready to become Mrs. Lyon?" The small white church was already half filled when they arrived. Rachel recognized most faces now: shopkeepers, ranchers, and townspeople who'd welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth over the past 2 weeks. Conspicuously absent were the Millers, though Rachel couldn't bring herself to feel disappointed. Amos waited at the altar, tall and imposing in a new black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His sandy hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn lock fell across his forehead. When he turned and saw Rachel, his expression transformed: surprise, admiration, and something deeper flickering across his usually stoic features. Reverend Mills, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, began the ceremony with a scripture reading. Rachel was surprised to find her voice steady as she repeated her vows. Amos's deep voice carried clearly through the church as he promised to cherish and protect her, his blue eyes never leaving hers. When he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he'd told her earlier, the metal felt warm against her skin. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Mills declared. "You may kiss your bride." Amos hesitated briefly, then leaned down to place a gentle, almost hesitant kiss on Rachel's lips. It was over quickly, but the brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, a rumble of thunder punctuated the moment, drawing nervous laughter from the attendees. The reception at the Caldwell home was a modest affair: cake baked by Martha, punch, and simple refreshments. Amos stayed close to Rachel's side, his hand occasionally brushing hers in a gesture that seemed both protective and seeking reassurance. She found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, the careful courtesy he showed to each well-wisher, the gentle way he thanked Martha for her efforts. "Mrs. Lyon," he murmured during a quiet moment, testing the name. "Suits you." "Does it?" Rachel smiled. "I'm still becoming accustomed to it myself." Amos's reply was interrupted by Martha approaching with another slice of cake. As the older woman chatted about the impending rain, Rachel noticed movement at the window, a small face peering in, wide eyes taking in the celebration. "Caleb." She excused herself and slipped toward the door, intending to invite the boy inside, but by the time she reached the porch, he was already fleeing down the muddy street as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. "Caleb, wait," she called, but the boy disappeared around a corner. Rachel sighed, noticing the small muddy footprints he'd left on the porch steps. The sky opened then, rain falling in earnest sheets that forced her back inside. "Everything all right?" Amos asked as she rejoined him. "I saw Caleb watching through the window, but he ran off before I could invite him in." Amos frowned slightly. "Boy's been skittish the past few days. Miguel says he wakes with nightmares sometimes." Their departure for the ranch was hastened by the worsening storm. Goodbyes were quickly exchanged, with promises to visit town soon. Amos helped Rachel into the covered buggy he'd borrowed for the occasion, tucking a lap blanket around her against the chill dampness. The rain fell in blinding sheets as they made their way out of town, turning the road into a muddy morass that slowed their progress considerably. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky, followed by booming thunder that made the horses toss their heads nervously. "Quite a storm for our wedding day," Rachel remarked, raising her voice to be heard over the downpour hammering the buggy's canvas top. "I'd have ordered better weather if I could," Amos replied, his attention on handling the skittish team. "Though the land needs the rain." They traveled the remaining miles in companionable silence, the rhythmic splash of hooves and steady drumming of rain creating a strangely intimate cocoon. Rachel found herself studying her gold band, still unfamiliar on her finger, wondering at the strange path that had led her from a New York seamstress's apartment to becoming the wife of a Colorado rancher. As the outline of the ranch house emerged through the gray curtain of rain, Rachel felt a curious mixture of apprehension and anticipation. This was her home now. These unfamiliar rooms would be where she built her new life. Amos guided the buggy to the covered portion of the yard and quickly came around to help her down. "Ready?" he asked simply, rain streaming from the brim of his hat. Rachel nodded, gathering her skirts. They made a dash for the porch but were thoroughly soaked by the time they reached the door. Amos fumbled briefly with the key, then swung the door open and, to Rachel's complete surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. The unexpected motion startled a genuine laugh from her, the first real laugh they'd shared, as water dripped from both onto the polished wood floor of the entryway. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lyon," Amos said softly, setting her gently on her feet but not immediately stepping away. For a moment, they stood close enough that Rachel could see droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes, could feel the solid warmth of him despite their damp clothes. "Thank you, Mr. Lyon," she replied, matching his formal tone though her eyes sparkled with amusement. "It seems we've brought the rain inside with us." Chapter 8, Home at the Ranch. "We should get out of these wet things," Amos said practically, though he made no immediate move to step away from Rachel. The intimacy of the moment hung between them, new, uncertain, yet not unwelcome. A crash of thunder broke the spell. Amos cleared his throat and gestured toward the stairs. "Your bedroom is up there, first door on the right. I've had Senora Vasquez prepare it special. There should be dry clothes in the wardrobe." He hesitated, color rising faintly beneath his tan skin. "I'll take the spare room across the hall. Until you're comfortable with other arrangements." Rachel felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. "Thank you, Amos." "Don't thank me for basic decency," he replied gruffly. "Take your time settling in. Kitchen's through there when you're ready. I'll stoke the fire and see to the horses." The bedroom was larger than Rachel had expected, with a four-poster bed draped in a handmade quilt of blue and cream. Lace curtains, clearly new, framed windows that would offer views of the distant mountains when the storm cleared. A solid pine wardrobe stood against one wall, a matching dresser with a mirror opposite. The room spoke of careful preparation. Amos had clearly gone to considerable expense and effort to make it feel welcoming. Rachel changed quickly into a simple dress she found in the wardrobe, hanging her damp wedding gown to dry. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified, rain lashing against the windows while lightning split the darkened sky. She made her way downstairs, following the warm glow of lamplight to the kitchen. The kitchen was the heart of the house, spacious and practical, with a large wood-burning stove, a sturdy table that could seat 8, and open shelving displaying mismatched but serviceable dishes. Amos had changed into dry clothes and was setting a kettle on the stove, his back to the door. "Can I help?" Rachel asked. Amos turned, momentarily startled. "Just making tea. Thought you might be chilled from the rain." "That sounds perfect." Rachel moved to stand beside him, taking in the kitchen with an appraising eye. "This is a fine room. Spacious enough for proper cooking. Senora Vasquez, Miguel's wife, comes in 3 times a week to cook and clean," Amos explained. "Rest of the time, I manage. Nothing fancy, but I don't burn beans too often anymore. Rachel smiled at his self-deprecation. I'm a fair cook myself. Mother insisted I learn household management alongside my sewing. They settled at the table with steaming cups of tea, the storm creating a strangely peaceful backdrop to their conversation. Rachel learned that the ranch employed 3 men year-round: Miguel Vasquez, who'd worked for Amos since the beginning, Jeremiah Burns, an older man who handled the horses, and young Sam Cooper, barely 20 but skilled with cattle. During busy seasons, Amos hired additional hands from town. The men bunk in the outbuilding, Amos explained. Gives them their privacy and us ours. He hesitated, then added, Senora Vasquez suggested you might want to change things around. Said the house needed a woman's touch. And what do you think? Rachel asked, curious about his expectations. Amos considered the question seriously. I built this place to be practical, not showy. But I ain't opposed to improvements. His eyes met hers. This is your home now too, Rachel. You should make it comfortable for yourself. The simple statement, delivered without flourish, touched Rachel deeply. This man, still largely a stranger despite their correspondence and brief courtship, was offering her genuine partnership in creating their shared home. As the evening progressed, the storm's fury increased. Wind howled around the eaves, occasional gusts finding entry through small cracks to make the lamps flicker. Despite the tempest outside, Rachel felt an unexpected contentment in the warm kitchen, listening to Amos describe the seasonal rhythms of ranch life. The conversation lulled naturally as the mantel clock struck 10. Amos rose, looking suddenly uncertain. It's been a long day. I'll show you back to your room. At the top of the stairs, Amos paused before Rachel's door. Sleep well, Mrs. Lyon. His formality held a hint of tenderness that made Rachel's heart beat faster. Good night, Amos. She slipped into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Sleep proved elusive despite her exhaustion. The unfamiliar creaks of the house, combined with the storm's continued assault, kept Rachel drifting between wakefulness and uneasy dreams. Near midnight, a particularly violent thunderclap shook the windowpanes. Rachel sat up, reaching instinctively for the lamp before remembering it wasn't her boarding house room. A sudden craving for tea led her downstairs in her nightgown and wrapper. She was surprised to find a lamp still burning in the kitchen, and Amos seated at the table, nursing a steaming cup, his expression distant. Amos, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, momentarily disoriented. Rachel. Did the storm wake you? I never quite fell asleep. She moved to the stove where the kettle still steamed. May I join you? Amos nodded, watching as she prepared her tea. In the lamplight, with his hair tousled and guard lowered, he looked younger, more vulnerable. Rachel settled across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Can't sleep in new places myself, Amos offered after a comfortable silence. Took me near a month to sleep through the night when I first built this house. Were you alone when you started the ranch? Rachel asked, realizing how little she knew of those early years. Amos nodded. Just me and 10 head of scrawny cattle. Lived in a one-room cabin that leaked something awful in weather like this. His gaze drifted to the window where rain streamed down the glass. Built this place bit by bit over 5 years. Started with the kitchen and added rooms as I could afford the lumber. You've accomplished a great deal, Rachel observed. Had nothing else to focus on. Amos's expression grew thoughtful. When my family disowned me after the war, I figured I'd make my own legacy out here. Something I could be proud of, something nobody could take from me. And now? Rachel asked softly. Amos met her gaze directly. Now I'm thinking maybe there's more to legacy than land and cattle. The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to explore. The conversation shifted to safer topics: Rachel's childhood in upstate New York, Amos's plans for expanding the North Pasture, books they'd enjoyed. Rachel was surprised to discover Amos had a collection of history volumes and poetry in his study. My mother taught me reading early, he explained with a hint of defensiveness. Just because a man works with his hands don't mean his mind should go fallow. I couldn't agree more, Rachel assured him. As the storm gradually subsided to a steady rainfall, a comfortable intimacy developed between them, not the physical closeness of lovers, but the deeper connection of two people beginning to see beyond surface impressions. Rachel found herself sharing hopes she'd scarcely acknowledged to herself, establishing a small sewing business that served the surrounding ranches, perhaps teaching local girls the finer points of dressmaking, creating a home that combined beauty with practicality. You have good plans, Amos said approvingly. Sensible ones. My father always said dreams without practicality are just fancy soap bubbles, pretty to look at but gone with the first breeze. Amos nodded appreciatively. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Rachel said softly. I miss his counsel still. My pa was different, Amos admitted, staring into his cup. Hard man. Expected absolute obedience, gave little praise. When I joined the Union forces instead of the Confederacy like my brothers, he said I weren't his son anymore. That must have been devastating. It was, Amos said simply. But it taught me something important about being my own man, making choices I could live with. He glanced up at the clock and rose. It's near 2 in the morning. We should try for some sleep. At the foot of the stairs, Amos hesitated, then said quietly, I'm glad you came west, Rachel. Glad you answered my advertisement. As am I, she replied with perfect honesty. In the privacy of her room, Rachel stood at the window watching the rain gentled now to a soft patter against the glass. Stars had begun to appear as clouds parted in the western sky. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the cramped New York apartment, the long train ride, the stagecoach to Smithfield. For the first time since leaving the East, she felt she might truly be where she belonged. Chapter 9, The Flood. The rain continued unabated for 3 days, transforming the parched Colorado landscape into a sodden expanse of mud and standing water. Rachel quickly established a routine at the ranch, rising early to prepare breakfast alongside Señora Vasquez, who proved a willing teacher of frontier cooking techniques. The older woman's initial reserve melted when Rachel expressed genuine interest in learning to make tortillas and traditional stews. My mother taught me these recipes, Señora Vasquez explained, her English accented but clear. Good food makes a good home, no? Mr. Lyon, he work too hard, eat too little before you come. Rachel found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. Amos spent most daylight hours outdoors despite the rain, returning each evening muddy and exhausted but visibly pleased to find Rachel waiting. Their evenings developed a comfortable pattern: shared meals, conversation by the fire, occasional reading aloud from Amos's modest library. Though Amos maintained his separate sleeping arrangements, Rachel sensed a growing ease between them, a foundation of mutual respect gradually strengthening. On the morning of the 4th day, Rachel woke to an unfamiliar silence. The constant drumming of rain had finally ceased. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find the kitchen empty, unusual at this hour. Through the window, she spotted a cluster of figures at the edge of the property where the land sloped downward toward a normally placid stream that bisected Amos's grazing land. Donning a shawl against the morning chill, Rachel followed muddy footprints across the yard. As she drew closer, she understood the cause for concern. The stream had transformed into a roaring torrent that had already breached its banks, spreading across the lower pasture where Amos kept his pregnant heifers. Morning, Mrs. Lyon. Jeremiah Burns touched his hat respectfully as she approached. The weathered cowhand's expression was grave. Afraid we got ourselves a situation. Amos turned at her approach, his face etched with worry beneath a rain-slicked hat. Rachel. You shouldn't be out in this mud. What's happening? She asked, ignoring his protest. Amos sighed, gesturing toward the flooded pasture. Creek's risen 4 feet overnight. Those heifers need moving to higher ground before the water rises further. Miguel's gone to check if Cooper's bridge is still standing. As if summoned by his name, Miguel appeared on horseback, riding hard up the slope. Bridge is gone, boss, he reported grimly. Water took it clean away. The Martinez Ranch is sending men to help, but they must go around by High Creek Pass. We can't wait, Amos decided. Those cattle are carrying next year's calves, too valuable to lose. Young Sam Cooper, barely 20 but already a skilled wrangler, shifted nervously. Creek's running mighty fast, boss. Horses won't like crossing it none. I know it, Sam. Amos's expression was resolute. That's why I'm going first. Rachel watched with growing alarm as the men readied their horses. Surely you can wait for additional help? Water's still rising, Amos explained patiently. Another few hours and we'll lose the whole lower pasture, maybe the cattle too. Then I'm coming with you, Rachel declared, surprising herself as much as the men. Amos's refusal was immediate. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. I grew up around farm animals, Rachel reminded him. I know how to handle livestock in crisis. You need every hand available. Mrs. Lyon's right, Jeremiah interjected unexpectedly. My rheumatism's acting up something fierce. I'd be more hindrance than help in that current. We need 4 riders minimum to move those heifers effectively. Amos looked between them, clearly torn between necessity and concern for Rachel's safety. You stay on the high ground, he finally conceded. Help guide the cattle up the slope, nothing more. You don't cross the deepest part of the creek, understand? Rachel nodded, accepting his conditions. Within 20 minutes, she found herself astride an elderly mare Amos assured her was steady as Sunday. They made their way carefully down the muddy slope toward the stranded cattle, who huddled nervously on a shrinking island of pasture as water encroached from all sides. We'll create a corridor, Amos instructed, his voice raised against the rush of water. Miguel, take the far side. Sam, you're with me in the water. Rachel, stay on this high ground and keep them moving toward the north pasture gate. The work was grueling and precarious. The frightened cattle resisted moving through the rising water, while the horses grew increasingly skittish at the currents swirling around their legs. Rachel focused on her task, guiding animals towards safety once the men had persuaded them through the deepest section. Her dress was soon sodden, her hands raw from the reins, but she felt a fierce satisfaction in working alongside her husband as a true partner. They had successfully moved nearly 24 animals when Rachel spotted a small heifer separated from the others, trapped against a fallen tree as water rose around her. The animal's terrified bawling carried across the flood plain. Amos, she called, pointing toward the stranded animal. He nodded grimly and guided his horse in that direction, but the animal was struggling in the deepening current. Without conscious thought, Rachel directed her mare along the edge of the flooding, seeking a narrower crossing point. Finding what appeared to be a shallow section, she urged the horse forward into the stream, intending to approach the heifer from the opposite direction and guide it toward Amos. Rachel, no. Amos's shout carried over the rushing water as he realized her intent. That section ain't safe. Too late, Rachel discovered her error. What had appeared to be a shallow crossing concealed a deeper channel carved by the raging current. Her mare lost footing, stumbling sideways as water surged around them. For a heart-stopping moment, Rachel feared they would be swept away. Then her mount found purchase on a submerged bank, steadying herself against the current. Rachel was now closer to the stranded heifer, which gazed at her with terrified eyes. Easy there, she called, her voice deliberately calm despite her racing heart. We're going to help you, little one. From the corner of her eye, she saw Amos maneuvering carefully toward them, his face a mask of controlled fear. Don't move, he instructed. I'm coming to you. Working together, they managed to free the frightened animal, guiding it towards safety through the rushing water. By the time they reached the north pasture, Rachel was shivering uncontrollably, her sodden clothes offering no protection against the wind that had risen as the day advanced. The last of the cattle safely contained, Amos dismounted in a fluid motion and lifted Rachel from her saddle before she could protest. You're half frozen, he said, his voice rough with concern and something deeper. Miguel, finish securing the gate. Sam, see to the horses. I'm taking my wife inside. The warmth in his use of my wife sent a different kind of shiver through Rachel as Amos carried her toward the house. Inside, He set her gently before the kitchen fireplace where embers still glowed from morning cooking. "You need dry clothes," he said practically, though his eyes revealed deeper concern. "Can you manage alone?" Rachel nodded, her teeth chattering too much for speech. By the time she returned downstairs in dry garments, Amos had built up the fire and was heating water for tea, his own clothes changed though his hair remained damp. "That was foolish," he said without preamble, though his tone held more worry than anger. "You could have been swept away." "As could you," Rachel countered, accepting the steaming cup he offered. "I couldn't stand by while you and the others risked yourselves." Amos studied her face for a long moment. "No," he finally said, "I don't reckon you could. It's not in your nature to remain safely aside while others face danger." "Does that displease you?" Rachel asked, suddenly uncertain. "It terrifies me," Amos admitted candidly. "And impresses me in equal measure." He settled into the chair opposite hers, their knees nearly touching in the small space before the fire. "When you rode into that water after the heifer, my heart nearly stopped." "I'm sorry to have frightened you," Rachel said softly. "But not sorry I helped." "I know." Amos surprised her by reaching across the space between them to take her cold hand in his warm one. "Thank you. For helping save the cattle. For being, exactly who you are." The simple sincerity in his voice moved Rachel deeply. Something shifted between them in that moment, the careful distance Amos had maintained since their wedding giving way to something warmer, more intimate. When he leaned forward to brush a stray droplet of water from her cheek, Rachel found herself holding her breath, suddenly aware of his nearness in a way she hadn't been before. The moment was interrupted by Miguel's arrival at the back door, bringing news that Cooper's Bridge would need complete rebuilding and that the line shack on the ridge had suffered roof damage. Amos reluctantly released Rachel's hand and rose to his feet. "Duty calls," he said with a hint of regret. "Rest while you can. I fear we'll have much repair work in the days ahead." Alone by the fire, Rachel replayed the day's events in her mind, the danger, yes, but also the exhilaration of working alongside Amos, the wordless communication that had developed between them as they rescued the stranded heifer. For the first time, she'd glimpsed what a true partnership with this man might entail, and the possibility warmed her more deeply than the crackling fire. Chapter 10: Unexpected Visitor. The days following the flood brought unrelenting work. From sunrise to sunset, Amos and his men assessed damage, repaired fencing, and cleared debris from pastures. Rachel found her place in this rhythm of recovery, preparing hearty meals for hungry workers, tending to minor injuries, and even helping Jeremiah rebuild chicken coops swept away by the rushing water. Though exhaustion settled in her bones each night, she discovered unexpected satisfaction in the tangible results of their labor. The ranch was gradually returning to order, with each mended fence and cleared field marking their progress. By the end of the week, the creek had retreated to its normal boundaries, leaving behind muddy expanses dotted with debris and uprooted vegetation. Amos spent long hours in the saddle, checking on cattle scattered by the flood and assessing damage to the furthest reaches of his property. South Ridge lost some topsoil, he reported over supper one evening, his face weathered from days in the elements. But the irrigation channels held. Better than Martinez's place. They lost near 20 head and their corn crops ruined. "How fortunate we were," Rachel remarked, passing him a second helping of stew. Amos caught her hand briefly. "Wasn't just fortune. Your quick thinking helped save those heifers. Miguel says 3 have already calved, healthy little ones despite the ordeal." Before Rachel could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Visitors were unusual, especially at this hour. Amos rose, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle mounted by the door. "Stay here," he instructed, stepping onto the porch. Rachel ignored the directive, following close behind. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out 2 riders approaching, one the familiar figure of Sheriff Caldwell, the other a small shape huddled before him in the saddle. "Evening, Amos, Rachel," the sheriff called as they drew closer. "Sorry to trouble you after dark, but we've got a situation requires attention." As they drew to a halt in the yard, Rachel recognized the second rider's passenger. "Caleb?" The boy's face was downcast, his shoulders hunched. Sheriff Caldwell dismounted with a weary sigh. Found the boy trying to steal food from Peterson's general store. Gunderson's apparently gone on a 3-day bender, left the child alone with nothing to eat. Amos's expression darkened. That old fool. Where is Gunderson now? Sleeping it off in my jail, Caldwell replied grimly. I've sent word to the territorial orphanage in Denver, but they can't send anyone for at least 2 weeks. Caleb's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. Please don't send me to no orphanage. I'll be good, I swear it. I can work, clean stables, fetch water, anything. Rachel's heart constricted at the raw fear in the boy's voice. She glanced at Amos, whose jaw had tightened at the mention of the orphanage. The boy could stay here, Amos said suddenly, surprising both Rachel and the sheriff. Until proper arrangements are made, he can help with chores. He avoided Rachel's gaze, his tone deliberately casual. We've got the space. You sure about that, Amos? Sheriff Caldwell asked. Taking in a child is no small matter. It's temporary, Amos replied, though his eyes softened as they rested on Caleb's hopeful face. Besides, Senora Vasquez has been complaining she needs a helper to gather eggs. Relief flooded Caleb's features. I'm real good with chickens, sir. Had M back home before Ma left. The matter settled, Sheriff Caldwell departed with promises to update them on Gunderson's situation. Amos showed Caleb to a small bedroom off the kitchen, originally intended for a housekeeper, while Rachel prepared a late supper for the hungry child. When's the last time you ate properly? She asked, watching him devour a bowl of stew. Mr. Gunderson made flapjacks day before yesterday, Caleb replied between mouthfuls. Then he got into his special bottle and forgot about supper. Rachel exchanged a concerned glance with Amos over the boy's head. Later, after Caleb had been settled in his new room, they spoke quietly by the dying fire. That was a kind thing you did, Rachel said softly. Amos shrugged uncomfortably. Boy needs looking after, that's all. And we could use the help around here. Is that the only reason? She pressed gently. Amos stared into the embers for a long moment. When I was about his age, my father sent me to work for a neighbor after I'd broken a valuable bridle. Man was harder than winter frost, worked me from dawn till dusk, fed me scraps, tanned my hide for the smallest mistake. His voice grew distant with memory. 3 months, I lived in his barn. Learned a lot about horses, and about cruelty. Rachel reached across to touch his hand. You're nothing like that man, Amos. I've seen how you treat your workers, your animals. There's not a cruel bone in your body. Maybe not, he conceded. But I know what it is to be a boy with nowhere to go. Before Rachel could respond, a piercing scream echoed through the house. They rushed to Caleb's room to find the boy thrashing in the grip of a nightmare, his face contorted in terror. No. Don't leave me. Please, he cried, still trapped in sleep. Amos reached the boy first, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he grasped Caleb's shoulders. Wake up, son. You're safe here. Caleb's eyes flew open, wild with confusion and fear. He stared uncomprehendingly at Amos for a moment before recognition dawned. Mr. Lyon? You're at our ranch, Amos explained patiently. Had yourself a nightmare, that's all. Caleb's breathing gradually slowed. I dreamed I was back at the train station. Nobody came for me, not even the police. Just got darker and darker. I used to have nightmares too, Amos said, settling on the edge of the bed. After the war. Thought they'd never stop. What did you do? Caleb asked, his voice small in the darkness. My grandmother taught me to count stars, Amos replied. Said if you can name 20 stars, the bad dreams can't find you. But I don't know no star names, Caleb protested. Don't need real names, Amos assured him. Can make 'em up. I called the brightest one Horse because it reminded me of my first pony. Another was Apple because it looked red sometimes. Rachel watched from the doorway as Amos continued speaking in his deep, steady voice, describing imaginary constellations until Caleb's eyelids grew heavy. The tenderness in this interaction revealed yet another layer to the man she was coming to know, a gentle paternal instinct she hadn't glimpsed before. When Caleb finally drifted back to sleep, Amos rose carefully and joined Rachel in the hallway. "Boys had it rough," he observed quietly. "Reminds me of myself at that age." "You were remarkable with him," Rachel said softly. "I didn't know about your nightmares." Amos's expression grew distant. "Some ghosts never fully leave us. But they get quieter with time." He hesitated, then added, "Having you here, it helps quiet mine." The simple admission, offered without embellishment, touched Rachel deeply. She found herself reaching for his hand in the darkened hallway, their fingers intertwining naturally. For a long moment, they stood connected in the silence, a wordless understanding passing between them. "It's late," Amos finally said, his voice husky. "We should get some rest. Boy will need proper clothes tomorrow. Nothing he has is suitable for ranch work." "I can alter some of your old shirts," Rachel suggested. "They'll be oversized, but better than what he has now." Amos nodded, seemingly reluctant to end their conversation. "Good night, Rachel," he said finally, his eyes conveying more than his words. "Good night, Amos." As she prepared for bed, Rachel reflected on the day's unexpected developments. Their household had expanded to include a troubled orphan boy. Yet somehow, this complication felt right, as if Caleb's presence completed something that had been missing. Amos's revelation about his childhood and nightmares had shown her yet another dimension of the man she'd married. With each passing day, the practical arrangement they'd begun with was evolving into something deeper, something that increasingly resembled a true family. Chapter 11, Summer Days. Summer unfurled across the Colorado landscape, painting the ranch in vibrant hues, golden sunlight streaming across emerald pastures and wildflowers dotting the hillsides in splashes of purple and yellow. Rachel settled into the rhythm of ranch life with increasing confidence. She rose before dawn each morning, preparing breakfast alongside Senora Vasquez while Amos and the men saw to early chores. Caleb quickly found his place in this routine, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, and helping Rachel in the kitchen with enthusiastic if sometimes clumsy assistance. "You're gettin' to be a proper ranch woman, Mrs. Lyon," Jeremiah observed one morning as Rachel expertly flipped cornmeal johnnycakes on the cast-iron griddle. "Wouldn't know you was a city gal just a month ago." Rachel smiled at the compliment. She'd been surprised by how naturally she'd adapted to ranch life, finding satisfaction in practical tasks and the straightforward interactions with the ranch hands. Even her appearance had transformed. Her once pale skin now carried a healthy glow from hours spent tending the kitchen garden, her elaborate Eastern hairstyles replaced by practical braids, her wardrobe consisting primarily of serviceable calico dresses she'd sewn herself. The large ranch house had begun to reflect Rachel's presence as well. Fresh wildflowers appeared in mason jars on windowsills, new curtains softened the stark windows, and the aroma of baking bread frequently wafted through rooms that had previously smelled only of leather and wood smoke. She'd established a small sewing corner in the front parlor, where she worked on commissions from town families between household duties. Most evenings found Rachel at the kitchen table with Caleb, patiently guiding him through reading and arithmetic lessons. The boy had revealed a quick mind beneath his initial wariness, soaking up knowledge with undisguised eagerness. "You're a natural teacher," Amos remarked one evening, watching from the doorway as Rachel helped Caleb sound out difficult words. "I always wanted younger siblings to teach," she admitted. "Being an only child was lonely sometimes." Amos nodded thoughtfully. "Never thought much about family myself. After leaving Tennessee, figured I'd live and die a bachelor." His gaze lingered on Rachel. "Plans change, I suppose." Such moments of personal disclosure had become more frequent between them, though Amos maintained his separate sleeping arrangements. Rachel sensed he was giving her time to grow comfortable with their arrangement, a consideration she appreciated even as she found herself increasingly drawn to her husband's steady presence. The morning chores complete, Rachel was hanging laundry on the line when she heard a commotion from the barn. Amos's shout of pain sent her running, laundry basket abandoned on the grass. She found him in the barn doorway, clutching his right hand, blood seeping between his fingers. "What happened?" she demanded, already pulling her handkerchief from her pocket. "Damn rusty nail," Amos grimaced, allowing her to examine the jagged gash across his palm. "Caught it while repairing the stall door." "This needs cleaning immediately," Rachel said, leading him toward the house. Puncture wounds can fester if not properly treated. In the kitchen, she worked methodically, boiling water, washing the wound with soap, applying the antiseptic tincture Dr. Wilson had recommended for every ranch household. Amos watched her, his expression a mixture of discomfort and something warmer she couldn't quite name. "You've done this before," he observed as she wrapped clean bandaging around his hand. "My father was prone to workshop accidents," Rachel explained. "Mother taught me basic doctoring early." Their physical proximity as she dressed his wound created an unexpected intimacy. Rachel found herself acutely aware of Amos's breathing, the calluses on his uninjured hand, the clean masculine scent of him beneath the day's honest sweat. Amos seemed similarly affected, his eyes darkening as her fingers brushed against his wrist while securing the bandage. "There," she said, her voice unexpectedly breathless. "Keep it clean and dry as possible." Amos caught her hand before she could move away. "Thank you," he said simply, his gaze holding hers. The charged moment between them shattered at Caleb's excited entrance. "Mr. Amos. I caught a bullfrog down by the creek. He's big as a dinner plate." The boys skidded to a halt, taking in their closeness and Amos's bandaged hand. "You hurt, Mr. Amos?" "Nothing serious," Amos assured him, releasing Rachel's hand with apparent reluctance. "Let's see this magnificent frog of yours." Life at the ranch had fallen into such comfortable patterns that Rachel was almost startled to realize the 4th of July celebration was approaching. Nearly a month had passed since her wedding day. Smithfield's Independence Day gathering was apparently the social highlight of summer, with families traveling from outlying homesteads to enjoy the festivities. "There'll be horse races, shooting contests, and enough food to feed the territorial militia," Amos explained as they rode toward town in the buckboard, Caleb bouncing excitedly beside Rachel on the seat. The boy had thrived under their care, his once thin frame filling out, his eyes losing their haunted look. Main Street had been transformed for the celebration. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated storefronts, a bandstand had been erected near the church, and long tables laden with food filled the central square. Rachel recognized familiar faces as Amos helped her from the wagon, Martha Caldwell waving enthusiastically, Ruby from the restaurant arranging enormous pies on a dessert table, Sheriff Caldwell supervising a group of men setting up targets for the shooting competition. "Rachel." "Amos." Martha hurried over, enveloping Rachel in a warm embrace. "And young Caleb, too. My, how you've grown." She stepped back, assessing Rachel with obvious approval. "Ranch life agrees with you, dear. You're positively glowing." The celebration was in full swing by midday. Children raced through the square playing tag, a fiddler and banjo player provided lively music, and the shooting competition drew a crowd of appreciative observers. Amos, despite his injured hand, placed respectably in the contest, earning good-natured ribbing from the other competitors. "Would have won easy if not for that bandage," Jeremiah insisted loyally. "Best shot in the county, our boss." Rachel found herself swept into conversation with the local women, answering questions about her adjustment to Western life and accepting commissions for winter sewing. She was selecting dessert from the overwhelming array when she overheard a conversation from behind the pie table that made her blood run cold. "Such a shame about Amos Lyon," a woman's voice said in mock sympathy. "Seems he can never keep a wife. First that city girl who couldn't handle frontier life, now this one," another voice agreed. Rachel recognized it as belonging to Josephine Miller. "Though I suppose mail-order brides can't be choosers. What exactly happened with his first marriage?" "I've heard whispers." "It's his cruel nature," Josephine's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper loud enough to carry. "Sarah wasn't the only one to suffer from it. There's a reason no local girl would have him after what happened in the winter of '79. Rachel stood frozen, the plate in her hand forgotten. She'd known of Sarah from Amos's brief explanation, but Josephine's insinuation suggested something far darker. Before she could move away, she realized Amos had approached from behind, close enough to have heard every word. His face had gone completely blank, a mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Without acknowledging the gossips, he turned to Rachel. "Would you care to walk with me?" he asked formally, offering his arm. They strolled in silence toward the church, away from the celebration's noise. Once they were alone, Amos spoke, his voice controlled. "I imagine you have questions." "Amos, you don't need to." "No," he interrupted gently. "You deserve the truth, especially after hearing Josephine's poison." He hesitated, then continued with quiet dignity. "I was never cruel to Sarah. She left because she hated the isolation, the hardship of ranch life. As for the winter of '79. Pain flickered across his features. "That's a different story entirely and has nothing to do with my character as a husband." Rachel studied his face, the integrity evident in his steady gaze, the hurt beneath his composed exterior. "I believe you," she said simply. "And I think I know you well enough now to judge your character for myself." Relief washed across Amos's features, followed by something that looked remarkably like tenderness. "You honor me with your trust, Rachel." As they returned to the celebration, Rachel slipped her hand into his uninjured one, a public declaration of her support that drew notice from the townspeople, including Josephine, whose expression soured visibly at their united front. The remainder of the day passed pleasantly, concluding with a spectacular fireworks display that left Caleb wide-eyed with wonder. As they rode home beneath a canopy of stars, Rachel found herself reflecting on how completely her life had transformed in just 1 month. She had arrived in Colorado a stranger, yet now felt more at home on this remote ranch than she ever had in bustling New York. Beside her, Amos drove the wagon with his usual quiet competence, occasionally glancing at her with an expression that made her heart quicken. Whatever remained unspoken between them, whatever shadows still lingered from his past, Rachel was increasingly certain that their marriage of convenience was evolving into something far more meaningful, something neither of them had anticipated when she first answered his advertisement for a bride. Chapter 12, Revelations. The ride home from Smithfield's Independence Day celebration was oddly tense, despite the peaceful summer evening. Caleb had fallen asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the day's excitement. Rachel could sense Amos wrestling with some internal debate as he guided the horses along the moonlit road. Finally, as they passed the creek crossing where they'd rescued the stranded heifer, he spoke. "Reckon we need to talk about what Josephine said." His voice was carefully neutral. "You've been mighty patient, not asking about my past." Rachel studied his profile in the darkness. "I trust you, Amos. You don't owe me explanations." "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I want you to know the truth. All of it." He fell silent again until they reached the ranch. After settling the horses and carrying a still sleeping Caleb to his bed, Amos led Rachel to the porch. The night was warm, crickets chirping in the tall grass, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Sarah came to Colorado with her father in '75, Amos began, his voice low. "He had mining aspirations that didn't pan out. When he died of fever that winter, she was alone. We married quickly, she needed security, and I." He paused. "I was younger then, thought love would naturally follow marriage. But it didn't." She hated everything about ranch life. The isolation, the endless work, the lack of society. Can't blame her, really. She was raised for parlors and piano playing, not cooking for ranch hands and battling dust storms. His voice held no bitterness, only a sort of resigned understanding. "When she left, I was angry at first. Later, I realized it was better she went. We'd have made each other miserable trying to change what couldn't be changed." Rachel absorbed this, then asked gently, "And the winter of '79? Amos's shoulders tensed. "That's harder to speak of. Has nothing to do with Sarah, though Josephine likes to mix the stories to paint me darker." He stood, pacing the porch length before continuing. "That winter was brutal. Worst blizzard in 20 years hit in January. I had a young hand working for me then, Jamie Sullivan, just 16. Good kid, eager to learn. Rachel sensed the story's tragic turn before he spoke it. What happened? Cattle were scattered by the storm. Jamie insisted on riding out to the north pasture, said he'd heard bellowing up there. I told him to wait, visibility was near nothing in the blowing snow. But he was young, thought himself invincible. Amos's voice roughened with old pain. Found his body 2 days later when the storm broke. He'd gotten lost in the whiteout, took shelter in a shallow cave. Froze to death while I was searching in the wrong direction. Oh, Amos. Rachel rose, moving to stand beside him at the porch railing. His mother lives in Denver. I send money regular, though she returns every envelope unopened. His hands gripped the railing. Josephine's family was friendly with the Sullivans. She's never forgiven me for Jamie's death, claims I sent him out in that storm. Suppose it's easier to blame someone than accept that sometimes tragedy just happens. Is that why you're so careful with your men now? Why you insist they never ride out alone in bad weather? Amos nodded. Learned hard lessons that winter. About responsibility. About living with choices that can't be undone. Rachel laid her hand over his where it gripped the railing. Thank you for telling me. Ain't told anyone the full story before, he admitted. Most folks in town know pieces, made up their own minds about my guilt. You were not responsible for that boy's death, Rachel said firmly. Maybe not directly. But I was the one in charge. Should have locked the barn to keep him from riding out. You can't lock people away from their own choices, Amos. He turned to face her then, his expression vulnerable in the starlight. When you rode into that flood water after the heifer, it was Jamie I thought of. History repeating itself. Couldn't bear to lose, he broke off, emotion making his voice rough. To lose what? Rachel pressed softly. To lose someone else I'd come to care for, he finished, his eyes meeting hers with startling intensity. The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning. Rachel found herself acutely aware of their proximity, of the warmth radiating from Amos's solid presence. I care for you too, she whispered. Amos lifted his hand to her face, his touch feather light as he traced her cheekbone. Never expected this, he murmured. Thought I was getting a practical arrangement, someone to help run the ranch. Instead. He trailed off, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. Rachel's heart thundered in her chest. Instead? Instead, I find myself falling in love with my wife. The words, spoken with such simple honesty, stole Rachel's breath. Before she could respond, Amos lowered his head and kissed her. Unlike their brief kiss at the wedding, this was neither hesitant nor perfunctory. His lips moved against hers with tender passion, his arms drawing her close as she melted into his embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Amos rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why didn't you? Wanted to be sure you'd come to care for me as Amos, not just as the husband you'd contracted to marry. Rachel smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I think I began falling in love with you the day you offered shelter to an orphaned boy, then soothed his nightmares with made-up constellations. Amos captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Stay with me tonight, he asked softly. Not out of obligation, but because you want to. Rachel's answer was to rise on tiptoe and kiss him again, pouring all her newfound love into the gesture. Amos responded with a growl of approval, lifting her into his arms as he had on their wedding night, but this time carrying her toward his bedroom rather than depositing her at her own door. Later, as moonlight streamed through the window, Rachel lay in Amos's arms, listening to his steady heartbeat. I never thought I'd find this, she confessed. When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, maybe friendship. Love seemed too much to wish for. Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones we don't think to wish for. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Sleep now, Mrs. Lyon. We've got a lifetime ahead of us to count our blessings. Chapter 13, Threatening Skies. August arrived with unrelenting heat that baked the Colorado earth and tested even the hardiest ranch folk. Rachel had grown accustomed to the warmth, adapting her routines to take advantage of cooler morning hours. She rose before dawn to gather vegetables from the kitchen garden, the soil already warming beneath her feet as she harvested tomatoes and green beans. The past month had transformed her marriage in wonderful ways. Amos no longer slept apart, and their evenings were filled with quiet intimacy that made the day's labors worthwhile. Even Caleb had bloomed under their care, his nightmares growing less frequent as he settled into ranch life. The morning mail brought 2 letters that would shake their peaceful existence. The first, addressed to Amos, bore a Denver law firm's letterhead. The second, addressed to Sheriff Caldwell but delivered to the ranch by Miguel after his supply run to town, concerned Caleb. "It's from his aunt," Amos said, scanning the sheriff's letter while Rachel prepared lunch. "A Mrs. Myrtle Gibson in Denver. Says she's been searching for her sister's child since learning of her abandonment." Rachel nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "Myrtle Gibson? The widow I met on the train?" Amos looked up sharply. "You know her?" Rachel quickly recounted her journey west, including her interaction with the wealthy widow. She seemed particular about social status, critical of frontier life. Before Amos could respond, Caleb burst into the kitchen, face flushed from morning chores. "Miss Rachel, the new calves got loose, and Senora Vasquez says dinner's gonna burn if you don't come quick." The discussion of Myrtle Gibson was temporarily postponed as Rachel dealt with domestic crises. It wasn't until that afternoon, while working in her small garden, that the dizziness struck. The world tilted alarmingly, forcing her to sit abruptly in the dirt. "Mrs. Lyon." Senora Vasquez hurried from the kitchen. "You don't look right. Too much sun, maybe?" "I'm fine," Rachel protested, though the ground seemed to shift beneath her. "Just need a moment to rest." But Senora Vasquez was already calling for Amos, who appeared from the barn with remarkable speed. "What's wrong?" he demanded, taking in Rachel's pale face. "Just a spell of dizziness," Rachel tried to reassure him. "Nothing serious." Amos wouldn't hear of her protests, insisting on fetching Dr. Wilson from town. The doctor arrived by late afternoon, his examination thorough but his expression giving nothing away until he'd finished. "Well, Mrs. Lyon," he said finally, packing away his instruments, "I'd say congratulations are in order. You're expecting a child." The news struck Rachel with mixed joy and apprehension. She was still processing the doctor's words when Amos burst into the room, having clearly been listening at the door. "A baby?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You're certain, Doc?" "I'd estimate about 2 months along," Dr. Wilson confirmed. "Mrs. Lyon will need to take care in this heat, mind. No more working in that garden during peak sun." After the doctor left, Amos knelt beside Rachel's chair, taking her hands in his. "A child," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Rachel asked, suddenly uncertain. Amos's response was to pull her into a fierce embrace. "More than I can say." He pulled back to study her face. "Are you happy, Rachel?" "Very," she assured him, meaning it despite her nervousness. "Though the timing is complicated, with Caleb's aunt appearing." Reality seemed to crash back into their moment of joy. Amos's expression sobered. "About that, the letter from Denver?" "It's from James Miller's lawyers. He's claiming rights to Willow Creek Valley, says he has documentation of an agreement my father signed." "Can he do that?" "Don't rightly know. But that valley's the best grazing land on the ranch. Without it." Amos trailed off, his jaw tight. Between legal fees and a potential loss of grazing rights, the timing of a baby is. "We'll manage," Rachel said firmly, squeezing his hand. Together. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Boss, riders coming. James Miller and his men." Amos stood, his posture tensing. "Stay here," he told Rachel. "I'll handle this." But Rachel was already rising to follow him. "We face this together," she insisted. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as James Miller and 4 ranch hands reined to a stop before the house. Miller's florid face was smug beneath his expensive hat. "Lyon," he called in false joviality. "Hope we ain't disturbing your evening." "State your business, Miller," Amos replied coolly. Miller produced a yellow document from his coat. "Found this in my father's papers. Agreement between him and your daddy, dated 1860. Gives the Millers rights to Willow Creek Valley and all water access therein." Amos's expression didn't change. "My father never mentioned such an agreement." "No?" "Well, his signature's right here." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Course, we might come to some arrangement. Josephine's always had a soft spot for this place." Rachel felt Amos stiffen beside her. Before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, any legal claims should be properly filed through the territorial courts. I'm sure your lawyers can advise you on appropriate procedures." Miller's gaze swept over her dismissively. "This is men's business, ma'am." "This is family business," Rachel corrected firmly. "And I'm Amos's wife." "For now," Miller smirked. "Though given his history with wives, I wouldn't get too comfortable." He turned back to Amos. "Think about my offer, Lyon. Hate to see you lose everything when there's an easy solution." As the riders departed, Rachel saw Caleb watching wide-eyed from the kitchen door. The boy's face was pale with worry. "Are they gonna take our ranch, Mr. Amos?" Amos's expression softened as he turned to the child. "No one's taking anything, son. This is our home." But later that night, as they lay in bed discussing the day's events, Rachel sensed Amos's deep concern. "Miller's got money for lawyers," he admitted. "Even if the document's false, fighting him in court could bankrupt us. And with a baby coming." Rachel propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Then we fight smart, not just hard. There must be records, witnesses who remember your father's dealings." "Maybe." Amos pulled her closer, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "I promise to protect you, give you a good life. Now everything's threatened, the ranch, our future, even Caleb's place with us." "We'll find a way," Rachel assured him, though her own heart was heavy with worry. "We're stronger together than any of us are alone." But as she drifted off to sleep, Rachel couldn't help wondering if their newfound happiness was as fragile as the morning dew, ready to evaporate in the harsh light of reality. Chapter 14, Confrontations. The next morning dawned hot and still, the air heavy with approaching thunderheads. Rachel insisted on accompanying Amos to the Miller ranch despite his protests about her condition. "I ain't made of china," she told him firmly, using the Western vernacular she'd picked up. "Besides, I want to see this supposed document for myself." Amos had taught her enough about ranch management to know that losing Willow Creek Valley would be devastating to their operation. The creek provided year-round water for the cattle, and the sheltered valley offered crucial winter grazing. They found James Miller on his front porch, boots propped on the railing as if expecting them. Josephine sat in a nearby rocker, her expression carefully neutral. "Well now," Miller drawled, not rising. "If it ain't the Lyons come to talk sense." "We've come to see this document you claim exists," Amos said evenly, though Rachel noticed his jaw tightening. Miller produced the yellowed paper with a flourish. "Right here. Signed and witnessed, dated June 1860. Your daddy traded water rights for 3 prime horses." Rachel studied the document carefully. Her father's work with contracts had taught her to spot irregularities. "The ink seems remarkably fresh for a 15-year-old document," she observed. "And the paper's yellowed, but the fold lines are crisp." Miller's face darkened. "You calling me a liar, woman?" "She's calling you careless," Amos replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "My father died in 63. This document's dated 60, but it's signed Amos Lyon Sr. He didn't add Sr. to his signature until I was born, in 62. Color drained from Miller's face. Josephine stood abruptly, her rocker scraping against the porch boards. "Daddy, you promised this would work." Her eyes blazed with frustrated anger. "You said Amos would have to." "Quiet," girl. Miller snapped, but the damage was done. Would have to what? Amos demanded. Marry Josephine to keep my land? Is that what this scheme was about? You were meant to be mine, Josephine burst out. Before that cattle drive to Kansas, before everything went wrong. But you came back different, distant. Then that Sarah girl caught your eye, and when she left, you wouldn't even look at me. Now you've brought this Eastern bride, giving her everything that should have been mine. I never promised you anything, Josephine, Amos said quietly. We were friendly, nothing more. You chose to see something that wasn't there. Friendly? Josephine laughed bitterly. You courted me at every social, danced with me at every gathering. Everyone expected us to marry. That was your expectation, not mine. Amos's voice held a finality that made Josephine flinch. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression. But this deception with your father crosses a line. Miller rose, his face mottled with anger. Now see here, Lyon. A man protects his daughter's interests. This valley rightfully belongs to the Lyon Ranch, Rachel interrupted firmly. As recorded in the Territorial Land Office and witnessed by a dozen old-timers who remember Amos's father refusing to sell any part of his claim. How would your standing in the church council weather a fraud investigation, Mr. Miller? The threat hung in the air like the approaching storm. Miller's expression wavered between rage and calculation. Finally, he ripped the forged document in half. Get off my property, he growled. Both of you. As they mounted their horses, Josephine called after them. He'll never make you happy. Ask him about Jamie Sullivan's death, about how he sent that boy to die in the blizzard. I know all about Jamie, Rachel replied calmly. And about Sarah. Amos told me everything. Everything? Josephine's voice held a desperate edge. Did he tell you he was seen kissing Sarah the day before I accepted Edward Harrison's proposal? That's why I agreed to marry a man I didn't love, because Amos betrayed me first. Amos wheeled his horse around. That's a lie, Josephine. I never touched Sarah until after our wedding. You're remembering what you want to remember. You broke my heart, Josephine whispered, tears streaming down her face. Everything I've done was to make you feel that same pain. I'm sorry for your pain, Amos said gently. But it's time to let go of the past. I've found my future with Rachel. They rode home in thoughtful silence. Near the creek crossing, Amos reined his horse to a stop. I should have told you about Josephine's feelings back then. Didn't think they mattered anymore. They don't, Rachel assured him. Though I understand her better now. Loving someone who doesn't love you back must be terribly painful. Amos reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. I'm grateful every day that you answered my advertisement. Not just because you're strong and capable, but because you see me clearly, past and all, and love me anyway. Speaking of seeing clearly, Rachel said, we should tell Caleb about the aunt in Denver. He deserves to know. Amos nodded heavily. Reckon you're right. Though I've grown mighty fond of having him around. As have I. Rachel squeezed his hand. But if Mrs. Gibson can offer him a proper home and education. We've got to think of what's best for the boy, Amos agreed reluctantly. Even if it ain't what we want. They found Caleb in the barn, helping Miguel repair a harness. The boy's face lit up at their approach, then fell as he registered their serious expressions. Something's wrong, he said. Is it about Mr. Miller trying to take the ranch? No, that's settled, Amos assured him. But we did receive a letter. About your mother's sister in Denver. Caleb's face paled. I got an aunt? Mrs. Myrtle Gibson, Rachel said gently. She's been looking for you since learning about your mother's departure. Do I gotta go with her? Caleb's voice quavered. I like it here. You and Mr. Amos are like. He stopped, swallowing hard. Like family? Amos finished softly. When Caleb nodded, Amos knelt to the boy's level. You are family, son. But Mrs. Gibson might be able to give you advantages we can't, proper schooling, opportunities in the city. Don't want advantages, Caleb mumbled. Want to stay here with you and the horses and Miss Rachel's baby. Rachel started. How did you know about the baby? Heard you and Mr. Amos talking last night. Caleb kicked at the straw. Thought I could help with the baby. Be a big brother maybe. Rachel's heart constricted at the longing in his voice. Amos laid a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Let's meet Mrs. Gibson first, he suggested. See what she's proposing. No decisions need to be made today. As they walked back to the house, Rachel noticed storm clouds building over the mountains. Change was coming, as inexorable as the weather. She could only pray they were strong enough to weather whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 15, Community Bonds. Rachel found herself increasingly exhausted as August dragged on, the combination of pregnancy and summer heat sapping her strength. Though she tried to maintain her usual routines, Amos insisted she rest during the hottest parts of the day. Can't have you overdoing it, he'd say, his voice gruff with concern. Baby needs you strong. One particularly sweltering afternoon, she sought Martha Caldwell's advice about Miller's attempt to claim their land. That man's been trying similar tricks with other ranches, Martha revealed over iced tea in the boarding house parlor. Tried to claim part of the Reynolds place last spring, saying there was confusion in the original survey. Did he succeed? Thankfully not. But James Miller's got money and influence. Folks are scared to stand against him. Martha leaned forward conspiratorially. Though I hear tell the territorial governor ain't too fond of him. Something about a mining deal gone sour. Rachel sipped her tea thoughtfully. Amos is worried about legal fees if Miller pursues his claim. With the baby coming. A baby. Martha exclaimed. Oh, my dear, how wonderful. When are you due? Dr. Wilson thinks March. Rachel smiled, touching her still flat stomach. But please, Martha, I need your counsel about Miller. Martha's expression grew serious. The county records might help. They go back to the first settlements. Sheriff keeps them in his office, though they ain't exactly organized. That evening, Rachel shared Martha's suggestion with Amos. If we could find the original surveys, prove your father's claim beyond doubt. Amos nodded slowly. Worth looking into. Though those records are a mess, been meaning to organize them proper for years. The next morning found Rachel in Sheriff Caldwell's office, surrounded by dusty ledgers and yellowed maps. The sheriff had given her free rein to search, though he warned her the task was daunting. Ain't nobody bothered to file these proper since old Judge Matthews died in '75, he explained apologetically. She was deep in a volume of land transactions when Caleb appeared in the doorway. Miss Rachel? Can I help? I'm good at reading now, thanks to your teaching. Rachel smiled warmly. Of course. Look for anything mentioning Lyon Ranch or Amos's father. They worked steadily through the morning, creating neat piles of relevant documents. Around noon, Caleb's excited voice broke the silence. Miss Rachel. Look what fell behind this cabinet. The boy extracted a rolled parchment, its edges crumbling with age. Rachel carefully unfolded it on the sheriff's desk. Her heart leaped as she recognized a detailed survey map, dated 1858, clearly showing the original property lines of what would become Lyon Ranch. This is it, she exclaimed. See here? The Creek Valley was part of the original claim. And look, there's a note in the margin stating Amos's father explicitly refused to divide the water rights. Sheriff Caldwell examined the map with interest. Well, I'll be. This proves Miller's claim is false. But more than that, look here. He pointed to several notations along the creek. Shows he's been trying to adjust property lines with other ranches too. This could put a stop to all his land-grabbing schemes. Word spread quickly through town. By evening, several ranching families had gathered at the Lyon house to examine the map and share their own experiences with Miller's attempts to claim their land. Tried to say my north pasture was his last year, Jack Reynolds reported grimly. Threatened to fence it off if I didn't sell cheap. Same with our East Meadow, added Carl Peterson. Said he had papers proving it was part of his original grant. Amos listened intently to each story. Seems Miller's been working this scheme for years. Time we put a stop to it. We stand together, Rachel declared. He can't fight all of us. Agreement rippled through the gathered ranchers. Plans were made to file a joint complaint with the territorial courts, sharing the legal costs among the affected families. Even those Miller hadn't targeted yet offered support, recognizing they could be next. As the meeting concluded, Amos addressed the group. I'm grateful for your support. Miller counted on keeping us divided, fighting him one by one. Together, we're stronger. Later that night, as Rachel prepared for bed, Amos wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting protectively over her stomach. You've done something remarkable, he murmured. United the whole community against Miller's schemes. We did it together, she corrected. All of us. A knock at their bedroom door interrupted the moment. Mr. Amos? Miss Rachel? Caleb's voice was small but urgent. They found the boy in the hallway, clutching a piece of paper. Letter came while you was meeting, he said. From my aunt in Denver. Rachel took the envelope, noting the fine paper and elegant handwriting. Inside was a brief message announcing Myrtle Gibson would arrive within the week to discuss Caleb's future. I don't want to go, Caleb burst out. Please don't make me leave. I can work harder, learn more. Amos knelt before the distraught boy. Nobody's making any decisions yet, son. We'll meet your aunt, hear what she has to say. But what if she wants to take me to Denver? Caleb's voice cracked. Away from the ranch, away from you and Miss Rachel and the baby? Rachel's heart ached at his distress. Then we'll figure something out, she promised, though she wasn't sure how. Whatever happens, you'll always have a home here with us. Later, lying beside Amos in the darkness, Rachel voiced her fears. What if Mrs. Gibson insists on taking him? She's his only blood relation. Blood ain't everything, Amos replied softly. But we have to consider what's best for Caleb. A proper education, opportunities we can't provide. He's happy here, Rachel protested. Loved. Yes, Amos agreed, pulling her closer. He is. They lay in silence for a while before he added, maybe there's a way to give him both, family here and opportunities in Denver. Just need to find it. Rachel drifted off to sleep with Amos's words echoing in her mind, praying they could indeed find a solution that would keep their growing family together while giving Caleb the future he deserved. Chapter 16, Uncovered Truths. The news of James Miller's land-grabbing scheme spread through Smithfield like wildfire. Rachel continued searching through county records, now aided by several ranch wives who shared her determination to expose Miller's deceptions. The sheriff's office had become their unofficial headquarters, with Martha Caldwell keeping them supplied with coffee and fresh-baked cookies. Ain't seen the town so united since the church raising 3 years back, Sheriff Caldwell remarked, watching the women work. Caleb proved invaluable in their research, his small hands able to reach documents that had slipped behind cabinets and his quick eyes catching details adults might miss. One hot afternoon, his excited cry drew everyone's attention. Look what I found. He emerged from behind a large filing cabinet, covered in dust but triumphant, clutching a leather-bound ledger. What you got there, boy? The sheriff asked, helping Caleb clear decades of dust from the book's cover. Property transactions from 1858 to 1865, Rachel read aloud, carefully opening the brittle pages. And look, here's an entry about Amos's father refusing to sell Willow Creek Valley. The entry was clear and damning. James Miller Sr. had indeed offered to buy the valley portion of Lyon Ranch, offering 3 horses and $200 in gold. Amos Lyon Sr. had not only refused but had the refusal officially recorded, stating the valley was crucial for winter grazing and would never be separated from the main ranch. This proves Miller's document was forged, Martha exclaimed. No wonder he was so quick to tear it up when you confronted him. Rachel studied the entry closely. There's more. It says Miller Sr. tried to divert the creek to his property, but the other ranchers stopped him. The territorial governor himself had to intervene. Like father, like son, Sheriff Caldwell observed grimly. Both trying to steal what ain't rightfully theirs. Armed with this evidence, the sheriff called a town meeting. The church basement filled quickly with ranchers, merchants, and townspeople curious about the commotion. James Miller arrived late, Josephine at his side, both looking disdainful until they saw the ledger displayed prominently on the pulpit. "This meeting will come to order," Sheriff Caldwell announced. "We're here to address some serious allegations about land claims in our county." For the next hour, various ranchers stood to describe Miller's attempts to claim portions of their property. Rachel presented the evidence they'd uncovered, including the original survey map and the ledger entry about Amos's father. Miller's face grew increasingly florid as the testimony mounted. When Rachel finished speaking, he surged to his feet. "This is nonsense. A conspiracy against a respected citizen." "Is it nonsense, James?" Jackson Blackwood, one of the oldest settlers in the territory, stood shakily. "I remember that business with your father trying to steal Lyon's water rights. I was there when the governor told him to cease and desist. You're following the same crooked path." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Miller looked around wildly, finding no sympathetic faces. Even Josephine appeared shocked by the evidence of her father's deceptions. "Now see here," Miller blustered. "Business out west requires aggressive tactics. Everyone knows that. Business requires honesty." Amos spoke for the first time, his voice carrying clearly through the basement. "And respect for your neighbor's rights." The meeting ended with the ranchers united in their determination to file formal complaints with the territorial courts. Miller stormed out, but Josephine lingered, approaching Rachel with an unexpected humility. "I didn't know," she said softly. "About Daddy's schemes, I mean. I thought." She twisted her hands together. "I thought if we could force Amos to need me, things would be like they were before. I see now how foolish that was." Rachel studied the younger woman thoughtfully. "The past can't be recaptured, Josephine. But the future is still unwritten." Josephine nodded slowly. "I received an offer from the railroad executive who's been courting me. Perhaps it's time I looked forward instead of back." She hesitated, then added, "I truly hope you'll be happy with Amos. He deserves that, even if I couldn't be the one to give it to him." Later that evening, as Rachel related this conversation to Amos, he shook his head in wonder. "Never thought I'd see Josephine Miller admit she was wrong about anything." "People can surprise you," Rachel replied, thinking of her own transformation from city seamstress to rancher's wife. "Speaking of surprises, Mrs. Gibson's train arrives tomorrow." Amos pulled her close, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "We'll face that challenge together, just like we faced Miller." "I've been thinking," Rachel said carefully. "About what you said, finding a way for Caleb to have both family and opportunities. What if we suggested he live with Mrs. Gibson during school terms but spend summers here at the ranch?" "A compromise," Amos mused. "Might work, if she's amenable. Boy needs education we can't provide, but he also needs love and stability." Their discussion was interrupted by Caleb himself, appearing in the doorway with an anxious expression. "Can I come in? Can't sleep, thinking about tomorrow." Amos patted the space beside them on the porch swing. "Come here, son. Let's look at the stars while we talk." Caleb settled between them, his small body tense with worry. "What if my aunt's mean? What if she won't let me come back here?" "We won't let that happen," Rachel assured him, smoothing his tousled hair. "You're part of our family now, whatever arrangements we make with Mrs. Gibson. You promise?" Caleb's voice quavered. "Cross my heart," Amos said solemnly. "Now, how about we name some stars? Think I see Old Horse up there, bright as ever." As Caleb gradually relaxed between them, making up increasingly outlandish names for stars, Rachel sent up a silent prayer that tomorrow's meeting with Mrs. Gibson would lead to a solution that would keep their unconventional family intact, while giving Caleb the opportunities he deserved. Chapter 17, Difficult Decisions. Myrtle Gibson's arrival in Smithfield caused quite a stir. The wealthy widow descended from the Denver stage in a fashionable traveling suit, her expression critical as she surveyed the dusty Main Street. Rachel, waiting with Amos and Caleb by the stage stop, recognized the same commanding presence she'd encountered on her own journey west. "Miss Mathers," Mrs. Gibson said, then corrected herself. "Mrs. Lyon now, I understand. What an unexpected connection this is." "Welcome to Smithfield, Mrs. Gibson," Rachel replied politely. "May I present my husband, Amos Lyon, and your nephew, Caleb?" Mrs. Gibson's eyes softened as she studied the boy, who pressed closer to Amos's side. "You have your mother's eyes, child. Though you've grown since the photograph she sent years ago." "You knew my ma?" Caleb asked, interest overcoming his shyness. "She was my younger sister. Headstrong, always chasing wild dreams." Mrs. Gibson's voice held old pain. "I lost touch with her after she married your father. By the time I learned of her situation, she'd already abandoned you." Amos cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. The ranch isn't far." Mrs. Gibson hesitated. "Actually, I've taken a room at the hotel. I'd prefer to speak there, if you don't mind." The hotel's parlor was mercifully empty when they gathered there an hour later. Mrs. Gibson had changed into a crisp afternoon dress that made Rachel feel shabby in her simple calico, though Amos's reassuring presence beside her helped quiet her insecurities. "I'll be direct," Mrs. Gibson began. "I've come to offer Caleb a home in Denver. My late husband left me quite comfortable, and I can provide advantages he won't find in A." She glanced around the parlor. "Frontier town." "What sort of advantages?" Amos asked quietly. "The finest schools, proper society, connections that will serve him well in life. I've already secured him a place at Denver Academy for the fall term." Caleb's face paled. "But what about the ranch? And the baby coming?" "I was gonna help." Mrs. Gibson's eyebrows rose. "Baby? We're expecting in March," Rachel explained, one hand resting on her stomach. "Caleb has become very dear to us during his stay." "I see." Mrs. Gibson studied them thoughtfully. "While I appreciate your kindness to my nephew, surely you understand he needs more than life as a ranch hand can offer." "He ain't just a ranch hand," Amos said firmly. "He's family. Blood family," Mrs. Gibson emphasized, "should take precedence. I can give him opportunities you cannot." "Perhaps," Rachel interjected, "we could find a compromise. Some arrangement that would give Caleb both advantages, education in Denver and family connections here." Mrs. Gibson looked skeptical, but something in Rachel's tone made her pause. "What do you propose?" "Caleb could attend school in Denver during term time, then spend summers and holidays here at the ranch. He'd benefit from both worlds, proper education and a loving family environment." "You seem very certain of your ability to provide that environment," Mrs. Gibson observed. "You've known the boy barely 2 months." "Long enough to love him," Rachel replied simply. "Long enough to know his nightmares, his hopes, his fear of abandonment. Long enough to want what's truly best for him, even if that means sharing him with Denver." Mrs. Gibson's expression softened slightly. "You're different from what I expected, Mrs. Lyon. When we met on the train, I thought you naive, chasing romantic notions of frontier life." "I was seeking a future," Rachel corrected. "I found not just a husband, but a true partnership and a family." Caleb, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Aunt Myrtle? Could I really come back here in summers if I go to school in Denver? You've grown attached to the Lyons?" Mrs. Gibson asked gently. Caleb nodded vigorously. "They're the first folks since Pa died who wanted me around. Mr. Amos teaches me about horses, and Miss Rachel helps me with reading, and there's gonna be a baby to help with." Mrs. Gibson was silent for a long moment, studying the boy's earnest face. Finally, she sighed. "Perhaps I was too hasty in assuming what would be best. The arrangement Mrs. Lyon suggests has merit. Relief flooded Caleb's features. Really? I can have both? We'll try it for one term, Mrs. Gibson agreed cautiously. If it proves workable. She turned to Amos and Rachel. You would truly welcome him back each summer? He'll always have a home here, Amos assured her. Always be part of our family. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave town, Mrs. Gibson drew Rachel aside. I misjudged you on that train journey, she admitted. Thought you were running from something, not toward it. Perhaps I was doing both, Rachel replied honestly. But I found where I belong. Mrs. Gibson nodded thoughtfully. I see that now. And I'm grateful Caleb has found belonging here too. She hesitated, then added, I never had children of my own. Perhaps this arrangement will give us both a chance at family. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Caleb sat between them on the wagon seat, occasionally touching Rachel's arm or Amos's sleeve, as if reassuring himself they were still there. You all right, son? Amos asked as they neared the ranch. Just thinking, Caleb replied. About having two homes now. One for learning and one for loving. Both homes will have both things, Rachel assured him. Just in different ways. As they crested the last rise before the ranch, the setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and purple. Rachel felt the baby flutter within her, the first definite movement she'd experienced. Beside her, Caleb pointed excitedly at a hawk soaring overhead while Amos guided the horses with familiar competence. This, she thought, was what she'd been seeking without knowing it, not just marriage or security, but a true family, pieced together from love and choice rather than blood alone. Chapter 18, Full Circle. As August gave way to September, the evening air carried the first hint of autumn's approach. Rachel stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach that had become noticeable in recent weeks. Amos stepped out to join her, wrapping an arm around her waist as they surveyed their land together, land that was now securely theirs, with Miller's claims thoroughly discredited. Hard to believe it's only been 3 months since you stepped off that stage, Amos murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Feels like I've always been here, Rachel replied, leaning into his embrace. As if my life in New York was someone else's story. The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention as Miguel approached with the afternoon mail. Among the letters was one from Caleb, who had left for Denver 2 weeks earlier. Rachel recognized the careful penmanship she'd helped him practice. Read it aloud? Amos requested, settling into one of the porch chairs. Rachel broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Dear Mr. Amos and Miss Rachel, school in Denver is real different from Smithfield. There's 30 kids in my class, and we got to wear uniforms every day. Aunt Myrtle hired a tutor to help me catch up, but she says I'm learning quick. The other boys was impressed when I told them about helping with the cattle during the flood. Amos smiled at the boys' descriptions of city life. Sounds like he's settling in well. Listen to this part, Rachel continued. Aunt Myrtle took me to see a real theater show yesterday. It was grand, but I miss watching the stars from the porch with you and Mr. Amos. She says I can come for Christmas if the weather ain't too bad for traveling. I'm keeping track of the days. A second piece of paper fell from the envelope, evidently something Caleb had stuck in, a newspaper clipping announcing Josephine Miller's engagement to Edward Montgomery, a prominent railroad executive from San Francisco. Well now, Amos remarked, reading over Rachel's shoulder. Seems Josephine's found her path forward after all. Sometimes people find exactly who they're meant for, Rachel observed, even if it takes time and wrong turns to get there. Amos pulled her closer. Speaking of finding who you're meant for, remember what you wrote in that first letter answering my advertisement? About wanting a partnership, not just a marriage? Rachel nodded, smiling at the memory. I was so careful with that letter, wanting to be honest about my expectations. You were right, Amos said softly. Partnership's better than I ever imagined. Having someone to share everything with, the hard times and the good. A cool breeze stirred Rachel's skirts as the first star appeared in the darkening sky. Soon the evening chores would need attention, cattle to check, horses to feed, preparations for tomorrow's work. But for now, they lingered on the porch, watching their land settle into evening. "Miguel says 3 more heifers are ready to calve," Amos reported. "Spring will bring new life all around, the cattle, the crops, our child." Rachel felt the baby move, as if responding to its father's voice. These movements had become more distinct lately, especially in quiet moments like this. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," she admitted. "When I left New York, I hoped for security, maybe companionship. I didn't dare dream of love. Didn't dare dream of family neither," Amos agreed, his hand joining hers over their growing child. "Now look at us, a baby coming, a boy who's part ours even if he's away at school, and land that'll pass down to the next generation." The sound of riders approaching interrupted their reflection. To their surprise, Sheriff Caldwell and Martha rode up, looking pleased with themselves. "Hope we ain't disturbing your evening," the sheriff called, dismounting. "But we've got news couldn't wait till morning." "Just got word from the territorial court," Martha burst out, too excited to let her husband explain. "They've officially dismissed all Miller's claims and ordered him to pay damages to the affected ranchers for filing false documents." "Not just that," the sheriff added. "Governor's appointed a special commission to review all property records in the territory, make sure everything's properly documented. And guess who they want to oversee the project?" "You?" Amos guessed. "Better, they want Rachel. Seems word of her work organizing those old records reached Denver. They're offering fair pay for a part-time position, work she can do mostly from home." Rachel's heart leaped at the possibility. It would mean income of her own while allowing her to stay at the ranch with the baby. "What do you think?" she asked Amos. "I think you'd be perfect for it," he replied without hesitation. "You've got a mind for details and a heart for justice. Besides," he grinned, "having the territory's record keeper living here might discourage any future land grabbers." After the Caldwells departed, Rachel and Amos remained on the porch as full darkness settled over the valley. A meteor streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of silver in its wake. "Remember that first night Caleb had nightmares?" Rachel asked. "When you taught him to make up names for stars?" Still do it sometimes when I can't sleep. Old horse is up there now, bright as ever." Rachel smiled, nestling closer to her husband. "We should teach the baby your star names. And make up new ones together." "We'll make up everything together," Amos promised. "Stories, traditions, memories, everything a family needs." As if in agreement, the baby kicked firmly against Rachel's palm. She thought of her journey west just 3 months ago, a lonely seamstress answering a stranger's advertisement, hoping for security but finding so much more. The advertisement that had brought her to this porch, this man, this life full of love she'd never dared to imagine. "Look," Amos murmured, pointing to where the moon was rising over the eastern ridge. "New month's coming in. Good time for new beginnings." Rachel watched the silver light spill across their land, turning the familiar landscape into something magical. "Every day's a new beginning with you," she said softly. Amos's kiss was gentle but full of promise. Together they stood in the gathering night, their joined hands resting over their unborn child, while overhead the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, horse and apple and all the others they'd named together, shining down on the home and family they'd built from love, trust, and the courage to believe in new beginnings. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.